Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fortnightly council meeting. A particular welcome to members of the public who join us in person and online, together with our council staff and, of course, councillors. In opening the meeting at 1 p.m, we note that Councillor Mackenzie is on leave. Also, City of Launceston acknowledges the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of this land. We pay respect to elders past, present and future as they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and hope for generations to come. We recognise and value Aboriginal histories, knowledge and lived experience and commit to being culturally inclusive and respectful in our working relationships with Aboriginal people. Please be seated. Item 3 of the agenda, declarations of interest in accordance with Part 2, Regulation 8.7 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures, Regulations of 2015. Elected members are requested to indicate whether they may have any pecuniary or conflict of interest in respect to any matter appearing on today's agenda, or conflict of interest in respect to any matter appearing on today's agenda. Are there any councillors wishing to declare such an interest? There being none, we'll move to item 4, confirmation of minutes. The recommendation that the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the City of Launceston Council held on the 9th of March be confirmed as a true and accurate record. Someone to move? Thank you. Councillor Palmer. A seconder? Councillor Britton. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried unanimously. Item 5 of today's agenda, council workshops. The council workshop report from workshops held on the 9th and the 16th of March. The recommendation is there with regard to item 1 and item 2, including the attendance at both workshops. Someone to move? Councillor Britton. A seconder. Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor Britton, do you wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Walker, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I should just briefly speak to that, and I think the public should always draw their attention to workshops and what is discussed in those. Necessarily, those details can't be provided, but nonetheless, there is an item there, which is the gorge chairlift refurbishment, which councillors were provided information on, and for the public to be aware that that their strong feelings of affinity with the gorge, our Indigenous Aboriginal community's affinity with the gorge, and the community benefit that we all receive from the gorge is always at the forefront of councillors' minds when it comes to discussing these things. So, yeah, many other things there that are of interest, but that one in particular, I think, is one that I'm happy to draw attention to assure people that the council maintains a close watching brief on any activity at such a loved place. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Any other contributions with regard to 5.1? Councillor Britton, do you wish to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried unanimously. Item 6, page 12 of the agenda, councillors' leave of absence. There are none. Item 7, community reports. We're thrilled today to welcome Kay Dowling and Jill McPherson from the Friends of the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery to provide us with an update via Kay on the activity of the much-loved Friends group. Kay, over to you.
Thanks, Danny, for your invitation to come and speak to the Alderman. I'm aware that some of you may not be up to speed on what our organisation does. As someone who worked for the QVMAG for 23 years and came to know that its potential, I became passionate about it and its future, and that's why I'm here in this role today, having finished working in 2012. I'd also like to thank the Council for your steadfast support of the QVMAG. For over 130 years, you have celebrated our community's achievements, educated us about the world and inspired us through this institution. It's an incredible resource for our city, our community, our region and our state, and we want that recognised and appreciate your contribution. Who the friends are? Well, we're people of all ages, all backgrounds, who come together to enjoy, support and promote the activities of the QVMAG and its incredible art, natural and science collections. While we're supported by the QVMAG and the City of Launceston with things such as an office space, graphic support and the provision of venues to run our activities, we're an independent community group and registered as a non-profit association, and we're run by a committee of volunteers. What motivates us to be members, you might ask? Well, surveys that we've carried out in the past have indicated that for older members, it's actually overwhelmingly to support the institution and to know what's going on. For the younger ones, they're more financially driven and are interested more in discounts to exhibitions, to the shop, etc., etc. But once we have them on our books, we tend to keep them. People love to know more and more about the institution. The more they engage with it, the more they valued it. Our purpose is threefold. First, it's community engagement. We use our newsletters, events and members and the public and personal networks that we have to encourage people to attend the QVMAG and to promote the understanding of the incredible collections we have here, the stories they can reveal about our world. But also, we want people to appreciate the vital work that the staff undertake to share this wealth through their research, the resulting exhibitions and school activities they present for the benefit of us all. We also support the QVMAG financially. This comes primarily from the membership fees that we gain, and over the past years, we've been operating for 35 years. We have contributed well over $500,000 to the development and care of the collections and to enhancing the visitor experiences. From purchases of items to the collections, such as $10,000 for the creation of items for display in the first Tasmanians Our Story exhibition, to funding furniture for the original cafe at Royal Park and sound systems to assist the presentation of events. We also run special fundraising projects and are particularly proud of our recent efforts, which contributed over $30,000 to the campaign to fund special cabinets to house the Lambkin Night Butterfly Collection. We also contribute volunteer support to the running of public events at the QVMAG, supporting their activities and initiating and running some ourselves. We're particularly proud of our lecture program, Our People, Their Stories, which provides an oral history of northern Tasmania, which has been running successfully for 34 years. It recommenced yesterday with a presentation by the former Mayor, Albert Van Zetten. Recordings of these talks became part of the oral history collections of the QVMAG, and they're an inspiring record of the contributions of over 300 people to the rich fabric of life that we enjoy here. Lastly, we're an independent advocate for the QVMAG. We share your concern that the funding of the institution, an institution of the quality of the QVMAG, is unsustainable for council, and it's of great concern to us. Our priority now is to rebuild the membership, which I must admit over the last few years, particularly after COVID, took a bit of a knock. We currently stand at 385 memberships. It's involving 500 people, which is significant. So that we want to ensure that we have a strong and independent voice from this community to support the council in its bid to seek appropriate funding from whatever sources to ensure that the QVMAG can not only remain viable, but reach its full potential. This has been made so much easier with the stimulating program of exhibitions and events that our members are now enjoying at the QVMAG, and I hope you've all had a chance to see what's going on there. I'd like to sincerely thank Shane Fitzgerald and his team, not only for all the work that's gone into making this happen, but also an exciting new vision for the future of the QVMAG. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you, Kay. And on behalf of councillors, can I thank you and your committee for your hard work, your dedication, your fundraising and your advocacy of QVMAG. It's appreciated. Thanks also for joining us today. Item 8 on the agenda, public question time, 8.1, Public questions on notice, responses there at 8.1.1. Kirsten Ritchie from Strike It Out. 8.1.2, the Tamar Bicycle Users Group, specifically Bike Fest. 8.1.3, delegations, Launceston Leisure and Aquatic Centre Facilities and Waste Management Centre. Item 8.2, public questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice from our community? I'll just ask before, if that's okay, Mr. Smith, we'll just read out, I know you're familiar, but we'll just read out the guidelines for asking questions, if that's okay.
If you are participating in public question time, please move to the microphone, state your name and address. You may then ask up to 3 questions. Please direct your questions to the Mayor. The Mayor may refuse to accept a question. If this happens, reasons will be provided. If your questions are accepted, they will either be answered at this meeting or taken on notice and answered at a future council meeting. Debate or discussion about questions or answers is not permitted.
Thanks, Alison. Mr. Smith, welcome.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Robin Smith on behalf of Coffee Republic.
Just behind the mic, if that's okay.
Business in the Brisbane Street Mall, Launceston. I've got a question about the officer report on agenda item 16.1 about the thylacine relocation. The first question I have is about the urban greening, and I've read that section. I take it that this is a bespoke installation. It's described as being 6 months of plant growing and presumably the fabrication of these structures. They're going to be self-watering, forkliftable, electrically powered, water-powered. So they're quite a substantial installation. I wonder the cost of those. Are they anything similar cost-wise to the ones we've seen in Charles Street? I imagine they're not inexpensive, being bespoke.
Thanks. General Manager Dan, are you able to answer that on the spot?
That's right. Good afternoon, Mr. Smith. So in regards to the question around the planters, they're actually called urban canopies. So they're prefabricated pots that are portable. So whilst they do require some footing to make sure they're safe within locations, there are 2 that have been ordered to come, so they don't need to be made here in Launceston. The 6-month window for growth, the intention is that they will be taken to our nursery. The planters will be planted. They will then grow around the existing framework and then relocated into the Brisbane Street Mall. The approximate cost of each of those units is around $30,000. They do have intelligent watering systems that are built into the units themselves, which saves on ongoing maintenance as well.
Thanks, General Manager Dan.
Very good answer. Thank you very much. So that was each, $30,000 each. So that's $60,000 for 2. Yeah, thank you. The next officer section I'd like to look at is the thylacine relocation, and this is where the officer has examined the options to move them. This is under the assumption they should be moved. But none of that looks at why you might leave them in the mall. It lists quite 7 areas and 7 reasons as to why this other place is the quadrant, but it doesn't look at why the mall compares to these options in any way whatsoever. It doesn't examine the mall other than it has to go. Could you speak to that, please? Because it's blaringly stark to me.
Thanks. In fact, Mr. Smith, the councillors will consider that exact question at the item at 16.1, and the answer will become relevant if indeed the motion is passed.
Very well, thank you. And finally, I noticed in the officer report it talks of, and I'm quite familiar with the incidents over the mall, it actually describes, and I want to be clear about this, that it talks in terms of the tripping over resulted in damage to the sculptures. Now, that's not something I've ever been aware of. There has been unintended vandalism, but I've never known that as a problem, that someone has genuinely had a trip, fall, and damaged the tigers. So that does appear there as probably the only reason to substantiate why they should be removed from the Brisbane Street Mall, but I'm not aware of that as a reason in itself.
General Manager Dan, are you able to provide response to that?
Certainly. So, Mr Smith, my understanding is that one of the statues which has been removed was damaged as a result of a trip. I think it was a tail or something may have been broken, so that has been removed quite early in the piece. And that was as a result of a trip or fall from the community.
I can't speak to it.
Thank you. Any other questions, Mr Smith?
I can only have 3. I would have a follow-up to that. Because I am not, there was one.
We'll further explore that at 16.1. You can make further comment there if you'd like. Are there any other questions from members of the public?
Thank you, Mayor. It's Rafael Molina here from Taima Bicycle Users Group. We are a community organisation with a membership of 100 plus members. And we recently saw the event Bike Fest and advertising by the council about this event mentioned that Launceston was one of the great cities in the world to ride a bike. My specific question is, what is the single most important piece of cycling infrastructure in the city of Launceston that makes it one of the greatest cities in the world to ride a bike? Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll take that on notice, and individual councillors may well be able to respond individually as well. We thank you as well for the work of TBUG in working in collaboration with the City of Launceston. But we will take that on notice and provide a more in-depth response with regard to cycling infrastructure at the next meeting. No other questions without notice? There being none, we'll move to item 9 on our agenda for today, a deputation from the Tamar Community Peace Trust. We welcome trustees Donna and Mark. We thank you and the committee's work that is undertaken in this important space, and we invite Donna to the front to lead a deputation. Welcome, Donna.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting us along this afternoon. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet this afternoon and their elders past, present and emerging. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon about the Tamar Community Peace Trust and the Tamar Valley Peace Festival. I'd also like to acknowledge my fellow trustee, Mark Baker, who's sitting at the back. He's my backup plan in case something goes awry this afternoon. We have a number of trustees who unfortunately couldn't be here with us this afternoon. Janine Healy, who's currently taking a well-deserved trip overseas. Joe Archer, who's otherwise occupied. Tamara Foster, and one of our long stalwart volunteers, Sonia Hindram. So I'd just like to acknowledge the efforts of all of the team. I have distributed some information about the Tamar Valley Peace Festival and the Peace Trust just for your information. I'm not going to talk to that specifically, but what I'd just like to tell you is a little bit about the story about the Tamar Community Peace Trust and where we came from. So on a day very much like today, a cool, crisp morning in 2014, the then Governor of Tasmania stood at the cenotaph in commemoration of Anzac Day. On that date, it was the 100th anniversary of the start of the First World War. Lamenting the extraordinary loss of life and the disruption that that war brought, the Governor wanted to reposition the conversation around Anzac Day. And what he asked the community to do was to find ways to resolve conflict without violence and to pursue peace in our daily lives. And that was the challenge he threw out to the community on that date. Inspired by that challenge, a local peace activist in Launceston, Jean Hearn, took up the cudgel, so to speak, but in a very peaceful way, because Jean is a very long-term peace activist. Her notion was that in order for Peter Underwood's dream to come true, peace had to start in the community. It had to come from the community. It had to be owned by the community. The community needed to understand it and find their voice for peace. So Jean had 2 ideas about how that might come about. The first one was to create the Peace Garden. For those of you who may be aware, it's a little peaceful haven just down at Royal Park near Stillwater, facing our beautiful Tamar River. There's lovely native plantings and places to sit, and it's an opportunity for the community to sit, relax, and just find that peaceful place where we can all go. And you put the noise behind you and just focus on peace. So Jean's passion was around how do we get the community to engage with peace every day. So in addition to the Peace Garden, Jean had this amazing idea of having a peace festival. Now, I imagine that many of you in the room are actively involved in festivals of all manner, shapes and sizes. What tends to happen with traditional festivals is you have an organising committee. You might be fortunate to have some financial and in-kind resources behind you, so you have some staff. What you do is put together a program, you commission performers, artists, participants, and you stage a festival. The Peace Festival is not like that. It's entirely unlike that. The Peace Festival is a grassroots program. So what happens at the beginning of each year? The Tamar Peace Trust gets together and we do two things. We think about a theme that might engage and connect with the communities of northern Tasmania. And when we're thinking about the theme, we are informed by what is going around us. Not just what's happening in Launceston, but what's happening in Tasmania, Australia and globally. So the theme for this year is connecting, sharing, pathways to peace. We've chosen that theme deliberately because we have a very strong notion that if you connect with somebody and learn about them and their story, then that's a way of making a connection. And if you're connected to somebody, then that's a start to building a peaceful community. So we're compelled by the storytelling, and Tasmanians are very good storytellers. So that's one of the reasons we've chosen that theme. We also then confirm the dates. So the dates of the festival this year will be around the 16th to the 23rd of September. We have deliberately chosen that week because it pivots around the International Day of Peace, which occurs on Thursday, the 21st of September. So that's the soil that the Tamar Community Peace Trust starts with. We then go out to our community, and our first community meeting will be next Wednesday afternoon on the 29th of March at 5:30 at the Kingsway, to which everybody in this room is invited to come. So the community meeting is about saying to the community, we've chosen a theme for this year. Here are our dates. Over to you. It's a remarkable leap of faith. So we say to the community, this is what we would like, this is what's happening, this is a framework, off you go. And over the last year, we've run festivals since 2015. We've managed to involve somewhere between 10 to 30 community groups each year. And they have come up with some extraordinary activities. They have done rock painting, they've done bike riding, they've done gardening, kite flying, welcome dinners, drinks in the afternoon. You name it, the community has done it. Because what it is about the community finding its voice for peace. It's not about us saying, here is your voice to peace. It's about the community saying, no, this is how I think myself and my community can engage in this conversation around peace and find ways to pursue peace in our daily lives. And so off they go. And then over the coming months, we work with the communities to support them to put their programs together. And around July, we send that program to print and then promote it and really encourage everybody in the Greater Launceston area to attend. So that's the community part. That is absolutely the heart of the annual Tamar Valley Peace Festival. But in addition to that, there are two activities for which the Peace Trust takes specific responsibility. One of those is something we call the Thought Leadership event. So this is when we secure a significant speaker to come to Tasmania or a Tasmanian to really lift the conversation amongst the community around peace. And this year, we're absolutely delighted that Ms. Rhoda Roberts, AO, an extraordinary leader in the Indigenous and arts community, will be with us for our Thought Leadership event on the 21st of September. So in addition to Ms. Roberts' keynote address, she is going to be joined by a panel on the stage at a Theatre North facility, and the conversation will be around how can festivals work to achieve social change? Because we've seen it time and time again that festivals can be a very strong mechanism to achieve social change. So we're going to have this fabulous conversation with about 250 people, we think, around this Thought Leadership event. So when you see the invitations for that, please, I'd encourage you to come along. But the other really key element of the Peace Festival is what we call the Peace in Schools program. So this is based on the notion that the conversations of peace needs to start very early. Too late at my age in some ways, you know, middle age, getting very grey. having a serious conversation around peace starts in schools. So the Peace in Schools program is about that. It's about engaging young people in a conversation about peace and empowering them. We hear many stories of young people feeling they don't have a voice and they can't change the world. And the Peace in Schools program is about saying, well, yes, you can. Even if it's your classroom, your school, your neighbourhood, your suburb. In fact, young people have extraordinary skills, talents and capability to offer to the peace conversation. And this year, we're very fortunate that John Kamara, who is the Tasmanian Australian of the Year, will be our Peace in Schools program key speaker. So John will visit around 6 to 8 schools in the Greater Launceston area, small classes, large classes, school assemblies, and he's going to engage young people and inspire them to have a think about how, as young people, they can pursue the values of the Peace Festival and find ways to resolve conflict without violence and pursue peace in their daily lives. So we're really excited about the opportunity for John to do that. So those events for schools are usually closed for obvious reasons, but in addition, there may well be some public events that the schools may offer. So if those of you who were around last year may recall, there was a school march on the river. So the schools assembled in Royal Park, they did some artwork, they made some speeches and they walked around to Riverbend. So that was a really lovely, colourful, active display, and that was their choice. That's how they wanted to express their views about peace last year. So it was really lovely to see them out and about. So just in terms of closing, because I am mindful of time, I imagine there's a clock ticking somewhere and there may be a very loud bell that goes off at some stage. Just keep an eye out for the information that comes out about the Peace Festival over the coming weeks. Please feel free to send it out to your community groups and connections. I imagine all of you are very well connected in the local community. Please spread the message about the Peace Festival. Have them reach out to us. We are really keen to support them. We don't have a great deal of resources, but everything that we have, we will offer to support the community. So whether that's helping them to get the necessary licences, perhaps secure some funding or some in-kind support from somewhere, we will certainly do much as we can. So speaking on that, I just wanted to thank Council very sincerely for your support over the years the Peace Festival has been around. Not only have you given us very generous financial support, your support of the festival by coming to events, promoting them through your social media and your website page, allowing us to put flyers everywhere throughout Council's buildings. We very much appreciate that. The Peace Festival would not work without the friendship and support of organisations like the City of Launceston. So on behalf of the trustees and all of those who've been involved in the Peace Festival over the last few years, I'd like to thank you for that. It makes an enormous difference. We don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of resources, but before COVID, we had a festival that involved over 30 events, attracted 1,500 people over 2 weeks. So it can be an extraordinary movement, so I would encourage you to spread that message. The festival works if the community is engaged. On the last slide of the material are my contact details. That's a very sincere offer to have you contact me if you'd like more information or there's information that we can send out to your community groups. So on that, I think I'll close and
Thanks, Donna.
questions.
We really appreciate you and Mark being with us today, and councillors will have the opportunity to reach out should they require any further information or wish to take a lead with regard to the offer that's been presented. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Councillors, we now move to item 10 on our agenda, page 22. Item 10, Planning Authority. Under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in agenda item 10, Planning Authority. Item 10.1, 10 St George's Square, residential demolition of existing dwelling, construction of a new dwelling. Councillors are advised that irrespective of us considering this matter at the previous meeting, we start the consideration of it again afresh. So I would ask, please, for our first speaker, Glenda King. I'll just invite Alison to provide us with the guidelines to those people wishing to speak to an item today. Thanks, Alison.
If you are speaking to an item on today's agenda, the Mayor will invite you to come forward to either microphone. Please state your name and address. You may speak for up to 2 minutes either for or against the recommendation. You will hear this sound when you have reached your time limit. You may not ask questions or enter into debate with councillors or council officers. Your statement is not to be defamatory, inappropriate or abusive, or be intended to embarrass any person. The Mayor may direct you to stop speaking if you do not follow these rules, or if your statement repeats points that have already been made.
Thanks, Alison. We appreciate you being with us to read those out. Our first speaker is Glenda King. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, councillors. Glenda King, 5 Scott Street. It's easier for an architect to recommend a complete knockdown to give them a creative blank slate, and this DA confirms this. No attempt has been made to create a new residence incorporating the existing building at 10 St George's Square. A house from the 1930s will disappear and the inherent qualities of the neighbourhood will be forever changed. Council has just circulated more than 1,000 notices, I understand, to people advising that their property has been identified for potential heritage listing. And I say congratulations for this extraordinary achievement. But what protection does our current planning scheme give to such buildings and to the integrity of their streetscapes? You've raised this yourselves. Similar questions have been raised by this DA, which illustrates how our planning scheme can badly fail established residential precincts. It also fails, sadly, the needs of people who own adjacent property and wish to continue to enjoy their existing amenity. The current amended design may mostly fit within the required envelope of the planning scheme, but it still creates an unfavourable impact for at least 5 adjoining properties. With its visual and actual bulk, its overshadowing of adjoining properties, and particularly overlooking of private open spaces of its neighbours, all of which will inflict a significant loss of existing residential amenity. These residents will truly suffer detriment, a sense of loss, and have sadly recognised that their elected representatives have been severely constrained while trying to resolve issues arising from this DA. Directly affected neighbours will incur a financial and psychological cost in trying to negate the intrusive impacts of this new building on their properties during its demolition, in its construction phase, and the aftermath. Regrettably, I do not support this DA.
Thank you, Glenda, for joining us again today. Are there any additional speakers for 10.1? Now, before I look for a mover and seconder of the item, I think it's only appropriate that I ask the CEO to provide an update with regard to what we sought when we laid this item on the table at the most recent council meeting. CEO, would you be able to provide an update to councillors, please?
Thanks, Mayor. So after the meeting, we liaised with the applicants. He took a couple of days to talk it over with his clients, and they decided that they didn't wish to apply any additional screening to the proposal.
And CEO, we have that in writing, correct?
Correct.
Seeking a mover. Councillor Britton has moved. Seconder, thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Britton, do you wish to speak to the motion?
I do. Look, it's fair enough. It's well within their rights to not put any of the screenings up. So that's all fair enough. And I do echo what I've forgotten. Sorry, but I do echo. I think it is a bit of a failure in the planning scheme. We can all see that there is a loss to privacy and amenity, and I think in a way the scheme allows almost a bit of a loophole where that doesn't need to get looked at or even thought about because it does fit in the envelope. And our hands are tied because of that. So I do think in the future, if it is possible, we should have a look at that. But obviously today I will be voting in support of the development, albeit reluctantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Britton. Seconder, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Unfortunately, I wasn't at the discussion last meeting, so I'm a bit out of what was said, but obviously, according to newspaper reports, it was a long discussion. about the privacy aspect, and it's something that, having been on council now over 4 years, comes up on many DAs where people, because of change, feel that their private space will be compromised. And there's no doubt that it will. I'm not trying to deny that. However, when you live in an inner city, that is what is unfortunately likely to happen. When you have small blocks of land, houses are built close together, people will have to compromise in what happens, because there are many advantages in living on the inner city. I've often said, I live in the middle of 3 two-storey houses. I can look into my neighbour on the left and he can look into my yard. I can look into my neighbour on the right and they can look into my yard. I don't. I also can look into my neighbours on the back 2 fences that also join my property, and again, I don't. Doesn't stop me from enjoying my backyard. Maybe I'm peculiar, but some trees do help. There's no doubt about that, that growing some trees will help soften the impact of what will be a different view to what is currently there. We are talking about a little workers' cottage that is single storey that is going to get knocked down and replaced with 2 storeys in some part, a big long building. But as Councillor Britton has said, it is within the building envelope, and the building envelope is there for a reason, to allow people to build what they wish to have. And again, if you look at the view that the applicant has, his view is to the north. And if you're standing on the first floor of his apartment, or of his house, and looking to the north, you're probably not going to necessarily look down into your neighbour. You'll in fact be looking at the vista at the skyline. And certainly, as someone who has a similar view, that's what I find I do. I certainly do not look in my neighbours' yards. I'm not sure if they look in mine or not. I've never been over there with them doing it. But to me, it is one of those things that we have to recognise if we are to have development and improvement. And if you look at other houses in that area, there's a number of them that over years have been replaced. This cottage was not listed on our heritage lister, and new houses have been built, including one for our next item, which has replaced something that was there. Now, it is different. Does that mean it's better or worse? That's usually down to personal opinion. But this is now the applicant's desire to build what he has, and I think because we have no real reason to deny it, if we simply do vote against it, then we'll be taken to the planning appeals and have to pay costs, because there's no real reason for us to have to deny this application. So I'll be voting, as Councillor Britton said, reluctantly, because I do feel for the neighbours who will be either overshadowed on one side and overlooked on the other by the house, but that's what the planning scheme has. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. A question or questions from Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Chair. If I could, through you to the planning officers, thank you. Mayor, just ask a question about the envelope. We are now in a situation where the building is wholly within the envelope?
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Manager of Planning, Richard. Town Planner, Duncan.
Thank you for that. No, the building's not wholly within the envelope. On the southern side, the modifications that they made to the design brought it to within the envelope. The planning scheme provides for up to 900 millimetres of protrusion through that envelope to still apply for incidental things like fixtures, eaves, those sorts of things. So relatively minor protrusions. On the northern side, it protrudes through the envelope. It's the vertical screens at the side of the windows. Part of those protrude through the envelope. The windows themselves meet the 3 metre setback from the side boundary, and therefore they comply. Minor parts of the building design protrude through the envelope still.
Thanks, Duncan.
Another question, if I may. Thank
Sure.
you, Mayor. And of course, the building envelope is a blunt tool, which is, I understand it, something that doesn't always meet the characteristics of a neighbourhood, let alone the demands of modern building and things like that. But nonetheless, once it protrudes the envelope, the blunt tool that we're talking about, it does trigger conditions regarding amenity. Is that true? Specifically, the performance criteria P3, where the siting and scale of a dwelling must not cause an unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Planner Duncan.
Yeah, thank you again. Yes, where it protrudes beyond the envelope, the performance criteria are called upon to the extent of the discretion. So we're considering to what extent do the shade screens against the side of the windows, to what extent do they contribute to the bulk and that perception of bulk and scale of the building. And when you're looking at it from off-site, it's arguable, and I've argued in my report, that those minor screen protrusions don't contribute to the bulk of the building, particularly when you're viewing it from the north.
Thank you, Duncan. Another question, Councillor Walker?
One more, if I may. Thank you, Mayor.
Sure.
So we're saying that it protrudes, and yet it's only the protrusion part that is considered against the performance criteria. The windows are within, and yet the windows wouldn't exist without the protrusion. So there's a certain amount of ambiguity there. But nonetheless, this is the only place that I can see in the planning scheme where the amenity of neighbours has some consideration. Is there anywhere else in the statewide planning scheme, Launceston Council's version of, where the amenity of the neighbours is brought into question by the planning scheme, other than here, where a development does protrude the envelope? Because the way I read it, it's only the amenity of the neighbours and the loss of amenity is considered in that performance criteria. If it was wholly within the envelope, there would be no consideration of that amenity. But in this case, it's not wholly within the envelope, and yet I'm being told, but it's the windows that cause the loss of amenity.
Walker.
I think I've made myself clear. Thank you.
You have. Manager of Planning, Richard.
I think the first point to make here is the application as proposed and as advertised was outside the envelope. We, through negotiation, have sought amendments to that and have secured those with a condition. Now those, as Duncan rightly pointed out, where it breaks the envelope now can reasonably be considered as minor protrusions, which are allowable breaches of the envelope. So that's the first point to make, is that the application as submitted breached the envelope, and through negotiation and amendments secured by a condition, it's been brought back into comply with the envelope. So and that forms the recommendation. Without the planning schemes are a significant document, and there are all sorts of provisions in there, and without searching every provision, the amenity is a word that comes up a lot in the planning scheme. So depending on the circumstances, different standards are triggered and different amenity considerations come up throughout the planning scheme. But it would be true to say that the key issue of building envelope and overlooking is done in the zone, and it is with the standards that are assessed here. They do the heavy lifting of amenity. There may well be other considerations depending on the circumstances.
Thanks, Richard. Any other contributions? 10.1. Councillor Kai.
I would like to say that I'm very disappointed with the results that we received from the proponent. I would like to apologise again to the surrounding neighbours for not being able to do anything to help them in any way with this DA. And we hope that maybe in the future we could try and move a motion or change some part of the planning scheme so that we could protect existing residents from unreasonable loss of amenity. But as for today, we have all discussed enough that we have really no choice but to approve this DA. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kai. Any other contributions? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, I may also be a little bit peculiar because I do enjoy watching the two Doberman in my neighbour's yard as I do a little nudie run out of the laundry, bathroom into the bedroom from our second story. But whilst it's delaying this motion hasn't resulted in any change, I think that it does send a pretty strong message to the community that this council is aware that there are issues that we see in the planning scheme and that we won't be afraid to speak up. And whilst this has resulted in no amendment, that it has set that message that we do have a real community heart and a community base, but we do also understand that we have a job under the planning scheme to go forward as well. So,
thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I wish to speak to this item and assure the Deputy Mayor that was definitely too much information. If we're talking about personal anecdotes, yes, I have quite a private backyard. I have a very small backyard, probably maybe a quarter of this room that we're in today, but it is private. And yet someone could build a double-storey building right next door to my back fence, my side fence, and I would lose all that privacy instantly. That's what's happening here. We have a single-storey dwelling that's being turned into a double-storey, and consequently that overlooking. And you know, we can all reflect on, it's a change that you'll get used to in time. No doubt that's true to some degree, but it's a huge loss of amenity in this case, and in other cases that we've seen come before this council that I've certainly seen in my time on council. I'm suggesting, and I, disagree through you, Chair, with Councillor Harris about the idea that we're going to lose if we take it to the Planning Authority anyway. That may be true, but there are times when you wish to protest something that may have to be the course that you take. There are times when people protest against the existing laws, and in order to do so, they may have to be arrested. They may have to go to jail. They may have to clog up the court system. Now, I'm not suggesting that we do that willy-nilly, that we reject everything that comes before us, but there are times as a council where we have to look at it, and while it does by and large fit the planning scheme, there are still elements, as have been talked about today, where it does not comply and it does rely on performance criteria, where references are made to people's amenity. And clearly, that amenity is being highly challenged when we talk about compromise and finding a way forward for this. By all means, let's do that. But at the moment, the compromise is all on one side. If the compromise is all on the side of people who are losing their amenity, the compromise is not on the side of the developer. That's what I have a problem with. We're here to enact the rules of the planning scheme, and if I want to be picky, I will say that this does not comply with the planning scheme. It does rely on performance criteria, and even if I'm told that we will not be able to defend that in a tribunal, I'm prepared to send that message consistently when these things come before this table, as I have in the past. I'm prepared to send that message to the Statewide Planning Commission via the tribunal if necessary, in order to send that clear message that this is having an impact on our community. It is not necessary. It was a single-storey dwelling. It's been turned into a double-storey dwelling, having adverse impact on its neighbours, not just the privacy on the northern side, but other impacts on the southern side in terms of overshadowing, which can also be considered people's amenity. The little light that they do have in their yard is being lost. Now, I know that overshadowing generally refers to living spaces. It's not referring to backyards, but it also does refer, again, to people's amenity. And that's something that could be argued one way or not. I can be advised by our suitably qualified planning officers that that amenity will not be enough to carry the day in the tribunal, but nonetheless, I will not be supporting this development application today.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Are there any other contributions? Councillor Dr. Raze.
Can I just ask our planning officer a question? Thank you.
Question?
What about we have recognized that there is much we can do to help our neighbours? What about if the neighbours feel the only way to protect their privacy is to build a wall to, cover the view from that window? would they be allowed to do that? If in this case, probably it might be like 6 meters high or whatever.
Thank you. Manager of Planning, a hypothetical question around the representatives being able to perhaps build a wall.
Well, the simple answer is yes. If you can build to your entitlement, the entitlement for this block is mirrored on the adjacent block. So the simple answer is you can build a wall to the extent allowable under the planning scheme, which I believe is 3 metres on the boundary for a length of 9 metres. I'm not sure planning approval would be needed for that under normal circumstances. So the short answer is yes, or vegetation screening is commonly used in the suburbs to provide separation between houses.
Thanks, Richard. Any other speakers to 10.1? Councillor Britton, do you wish to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, raise their hand. Those against? Councillor Palmer, McMahon, Pentridge and Walker are against. That is carried. 7-4. Anthea, you're okay with that? You've got those against, if you could just raise your hand again. Palmer, McMahon, Walker and Pentridge. That motion is carried. Thank you. Item 10.2, minor amendment, 16 St George's Square and 14 St George's Square, East Launceston, construction of a dwelling. We have 2 speakers. The first speaker listed is Glenda King.
Glenda King, 5 Scott Street. The demolition of the original architect-designed 1950s residence and the complexity of the high number of changes to the multiple DAs for the development of the double block of 14 to 16 St George's Square has caused great distress and uncertainty to our community, much work for council officers and embarrassment to council. One DA elicited nearly 60 representations opposing the development, the highest ever for a single residence DA. There was considerable community anger and pushback at the destruction of the original 1870s brick wall. Despite the developer submitting a DA stating the wall would be retained, it was subsequently demolished for safety reasons just prior to a council meeting which was to consider its heritage list. In accepting the permit for the building of a single residence on number 14, the developer agreed that the small section of the demolished wall fronting Scott Street would be reconstructed in brick to match the replacement wall fronting St George's Square. A permit, in my view, is a contract, and the fundamental permit condition for this development is that, and it is, I consider, hardly minor. The argument that the existing chestnut tree on the corner will be severely damaged by hand-excavated footings for the brick wall, as required by the vegetation management plan, is questionable. The Scott Street wall's footings are solid and still in place. Why can they not be used? New footings that would be needed can be shallow, 400 millimetres, perhaps maximum, in line with those that were actually constructed and excavated for the new front wall. And documentary evidence of the dug footings for the front wall is available. So please be consistent with your original decision and support the recommendations of your planner. Reject this DA and enforce the original condition for a reconstructed brick wall on Scott Street. Your community expects nothing less.
Thank you, Glenda. Next, I have listed George Walker.
I just need to clear my throat. Good afternoon, Mayor and councillors. My name is George Walker. I'm town planner with 60 Degrees, who are the applicants with respect to this item. Our address is 27 Charles Street, Launceston. We believe the request to amend the planning permit has robust merit under the test prescribed by the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. The primary test when considering a request to amend the planning permit is to determine whether the amendment as requested will result in an increase in detriment to any person. The proposed amendment seeks to replace 2.8 metres length of brick fence on Scott Street, which is required by condition 10 of the planning permit, with the colour-bond metal panels to match the existing fence, which is obviously already there. The primary reason for this is that the permit included 4 conditions relating to the protection and preservation of a mature tree in the northeast corner of the property, the trunk of which is 900 metres from the fence footing. The conditions specify that the tree must be protected from damage associated with the construction of the fence. The arborist report concluded that the best outcome for the protection of the tree is to ensure that there is no damage, is to leave the existing brick foundation in place, which will ensure no disturbance or excavation to the structural root zone of the tree. The brick fence will result in significant disturbance to the structural root zone of the tree, and we contend that the requirement to construct the brick fence is in direct conflict with the other conditions to protect the tree. The zero damage to the tree as required by the permit is unable to be overcome by engineering solutions. In terms of the footings, the engineered footings is 2 piles within the structural root zone at 2 metres, which is that deep, and very difficult to construct those by hand. We contend that the proposed amendment will not result in a detrimental impact to any person for the following reasons. The colour-bond fence will ensure that the mature tree remains protected from any disturbance required by the construction of the brick fence, which is no overwhelming requirement of the permit. The mature tree provides significant benefits to the property and contributes positively to the streetscape. And I believe my time is up.
Thank you. And we didn't include the coughs, so that was fine. I have no other speakers listed. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor. Hopefully I stood up at the right time. I stand in support of the property owner at 14 to 16 St George's Square, and I'd like to move an alternate motion, if I may, please.
Could you read the alternate motion to councillors and the community?
I can. The amendment is minor in nature and would not unreasonably diminish the heritage values of the existing brick fence and would not cause detriment to other persons.
Thank you. Anthea, do we have that? Yes, we do. Thank you. Is there a seconder for that alternate motion? Councillor Britton. Thank you. Councillor Palmer, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Looking at all the facts in front of me, as all my fellow councillors do as well, I don't like the thought of making or damaging the tree in any way, shape or form. I think the fence, as it stands right now, is really good. I think that the report there from the experts in relation to the digging into the footings speaks for itself, and I think that if we go ahead and approve, in all respect to our town planners, if we go along with their recommendation, I believe that it will damage the tree, therefore the tree will die, and I don't think that's good in any way, shape or form. Therefore, if we could move ahead with my recommendation and leave the fence as is. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Palmer. A question, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. A question for you regarding some of the information that's been presented to us today, and that is, first of all, in regard to the footing for a brick wall. To me, as someone who's laid a few bricks, including brick walls, a footing of 2 metres for singly a brick wall. My brother built a 2-storey concrete slab in the air house with another slab on the ground, and he didn't have to go 2 metres. I am astounded to their claim that it is 2 metres. Is there a standard for a brick wall in the type of soil that exists in St George's Square?
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Manager of Planning, Richard.
That's not something that the council planners are qualified to provide advice on, and it would be determined by a building surveyor at the time, noting that the condition on the permit requires hand excavation, etc., for the digging of those footings.
Noting, of course, that it's concerning the detriment that it would cause. Councillor Britton, question?
Thank you. Just some clarification. Was the wall heritage listed at the time it was pulled down?
Thanks, Councillor Britton. Manager of Planning.
The council had written to the property owner on the 15th of July 2019, indicating that it was its intention to list the wall, or to consider listing the wall. On the 14th of August 2019, approximately a month later, we got notification that the wall had been demolished under the instructions of a building surveyor, as it was deemed to be dangerous.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Britton, any further questions at this point?
Might be a bit hard to answer, but are there any other examples where a heritage listed, a building or wall has been heritage listed retrospectively like this?
Manager of Planning, Richard.
I don't think you could necessarily call this retrospective. The train had left the station when it was demolished, so the process flowed through the system.
Thank you.
The wall was in place when it was demolished. So I don't think it's retrospective in the sense that the intention was there to list prior to it being demolished.
Councillor Kai, a question?
Thank you, Mayor. I was wondering if the owner was to pull down the colorbond fence and then start digging this footing to put the brick fence in, and then find that it will damage the root of the tree, and then they've got to go back to the original plans or however, who has to pay for all those costs?
Thanks, Councillor Kai. Manager of Planning.
I'm not sure I understand the question. The costs of development are borne entirely by the developer.
Sorry, so what I mean was that, say we make them pull down the fence and then they start digging for the footing, and then it goes back to their original claim, which is that it was going to damage the trees, then they can't continue. Yeah, will they be compensated because they can't continue to do what we've asked them to do without damaging this tree? So then they've got to go back to the original plan, which is what they had there before, and putting the colour bond in.
No, that's not quite how it would work. If we require the fence to be built, the fence will be built. They will take all due care not to damage the tree, as they did with the house, and as Glenda did with her house, and how the new house did. There's trees in that area. The excavations are done under supervision of an arborist. Sometimes roots have to be cut, but they're done in the most sensitive way possible. That may impact on the tree, but severing a root is unlikely to kill the tree. But it may admittedly have some damage to the tree. But the intent of this is to require the wall to be built.
Thanks.
I have one more question. No,
Sure.
I know I asked this last week, but I was wondering, looking at the photos, that footing does look quite, what's the word? Substantial. Is it possible for engineers to design something so that they can still use that footing and have a brick wall put on top of that? Is that possible?
Manager of Planning.
That's a matter for an engineer and a building surveyor at the time. So it's not appropriate probably to speculate at this point whether that can be done. That's not what's being proposed, and that's not what we're determining today.
Councillor Harris, a question?
Thank you. I'd forgotten, I was just pondering the other questions that Councillor Kai had asked. The rebuilding of the wall was a condition of the original development application for the house. So the fact that we knew at the time that the wall had been knocked down, and we had requested, and the applicant had agreed to rebuild the wall, including the Scott Street extension. Is that correct?
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Manager of Planning, Town Planner Duncan. Happy with either of you.
Sorry, thank you. The answer is yes. The applicant was aware at the time that we would be requiring the wall section to be rebuilt.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, any further questions? Councillor Walker, question.
Thank you, and I can understand it might be somewhat frustrating for George Walker listening to these queries about engineering, and also for the planners. We seem to be short of some information to make a decision here. We see that there's a footing. We don't know if that footing is able to secure a new brick wall. I'm not speaking, I'm working towards a question. Thank you, Chair. We see that there was originally a brick wall there with that footing, which may or may not be substantial enough to support it. My question is, and I've looked through the supporting documentation, I see no engineering report describing the depth required for the fence to be completed. I might have missed it. I'd be happy if someone can point that out. And I'm not expecting anyone to answer the question of how deep it should be, but more the question is, you know, why haven't we got the information? And if we haven't got the information, are we able to delay this decision until that information is forthcoming?
Manager of Planning, Richard.
We're not considering the footing design today. We're considering the replacement of the wall and an amendment to swap the brick for colour bond. The permit to build the wall requires that to be done under best practice under the supervision of an arborist. Whether the footings are 400, 600 or 1200, I'm not sure really matters. It will be done under the supervision of an arborist. If a root needs to be cut, then it will be cut. That's what the implication of this is.
CEO.
So I'll just add, in terms of, obviously the decision that's before council today comes down to the interpretation or the council's view on detriment in terms of whether the minor amendment is going to cause a detriment to persons. Certainly the professional advice was there's a view that it was going to cause detriment to persons. The alternate motion is suggesting otherwise, and I guess that's the crux of the decision today.
Thank you, CEO. Another question, Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And well, yes, an addendum to that, I suppose, that, and I do understand that ultimately that is the decision, but I hope people can appreciate that that decision does somewhat hinge upon the implications of building what would be a wall with footings or not. Obviously, there are existing footings. They might be 400 millimetres. They might perfectly support a new brick wall, or they may not. I'm not speaking. I'll work to the question. The question is, as I previously asked, is there a chance that we can delay this decision while that information is found?
CEO, the relevance of the request with regard to the additional information that Councillor Walker is seeking and set against a deferral.
Obviously, in answering that question, the council can do as it chooses in respect of the application. There's no time requirement, as I understand, looking at the planners at the back. But again, I would just reiterate the fact that it's not material to the decision that's before council today.
Thank you, CEO. Question, Councillor Britton. Councillor Britton, you may. As the seconder.
Thank you. I think what we're all struggling with is it would appear in the photos and from looking at it that there is footings there for a brick wall already. I think what I am struggling with is if those footings are there and they're already able to support a brick wall, although I am a seconder of this, if it is simple as building a new brick wall over those footings, I think they should do it. If it is not that simple and they need to remove those footings, make them better, rip the ground up and potentially hurt the tree, I can understand why we should just leave it as is at the moment. But I don't think that is being answered at the moment. So I'll ask the question as well. Can the footings that are currently in the ground under the current colour-bond fence support the same brick fence that was there previously?
So notwithstanding Manager of Planning, we've heard your response previously. Are you able to provide us with any additional information specifically regarding the question Councillor Britton has asked?
It's certainly the advice that we've had from the applicant is that the answer to that is no. The wall was pulled down because it was on a lane and it was deemed to be unsafe by a building surveyor. The advice that we have from the applicant is that those footings need to be reconstructed.
Thank you. Another question, Councillor Britton.
If they didn't pull the wall down and it was deemed unsafe, what would have been required of them in that instance?
Manager of Planning.
So can I just understand the question?
Yeah, so obviously if the wall's been deemed unsafe and they've pulled it down.
The wall was deemed unsafe by the applicant themselves?
Yes, correct.
The brick wall.
Thank you, Councillor Britton. Are you speaking with regard to the wall whole or the small portion?
Well, I guess I'm asking, if indeed Scott Street wasn't unsafe, then that would lead me to believe that the footings that are currently there could hold a wall if it was built the same way.
Manager of Planning, the regard for the wall being unsafe at the time that...
It was demolished in 2 stages. So the first one was demolished and the second one was demolished for the same reason. Because it was deemed by the property owners to be unsafe.
Okay. And that.
So I think we've heard that the footing is what it is. That question has been answered a number of times now.
But can I?
Another question?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. If the wall was unsafe but it was not pulled down, it would still be deemed as unsafe. What would have happened as a consequence of it being deemed as unsafe?
Manager of Planning, should the applicant not have demolished the wall deeming it to be unsafe, would we have determined it as unsafe and would it still be there?
I mean, that's a difficult one, but I think if it was leaning to such a degree that the council determined it to be a risk to public safety, then we would probably have intervened at that point. But I don't think it was on our radar when we were notified. I don't think it was leaning; it was propped, so I don't think it was on our radar at that time. But conceivably, we may have intervened if it was deemed to be a public safety risk to people on the footpath.
CEO.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So certainly we have, and so there's 2 walls at the moment around town where the council have taken action to prevent pedestrian access whilst there's issues with stability that are being investigated and rectified. So had we become aware of it, we would have acted. And again, it was a building surveyor that made the decision in respect of the stability of the wall, and we would rely on the same service if we had a compliance or one of our own fences that were in that situation. So,
Councillor Britton.
The reason I'm asking all of that is if it would have been deemed unsafe and we would have had to intervene, if we had to look after the tree as well, is it not feasible and common sense to think that we would have not built the wall in the same way if it was going to be at a detriment to the tree? Therefore, should we not just leave the colour-bond fence there now, because that is probably what could have ended up happening regardless?
Thanks, Councillor Britton. Manager of Planning, Richard.
Well, recognising that this is a hypothetical question, but I think the wall is significant. The wall is significant because it's an original, or was an original wall of a bigger estate that shows the evolution of Launceston. And it was important to the community, to the history of Launceston and the streetscape. So the tree, whilst it's a nice tree, is a garden tree. So it was planted at some point in the history of the house. It's not a significant tree, it's not a giant sequoia or an enormous tree that has significant, it's a garden tree, it's a fruit tree in the garden. So I'm not wishing ill on the tree, but the significance of the wall, which goes back to the middle of last century, is associated with a grand house in Launceston and has a long-standing history in the streetscape. That was the thing that was driving the motivation to rebuild the wall and why it was required to be built consistent with the wall aesthetically and why it reused the bricks. It was the wall that was seen to be the important factor.
Question, Councillor Walker, do you have a question? Yep, you'll be after Councillor Kai. Councillor Kai, question.
Right, so from what I've just heard now, so if it was between the fence and the tree, I'm assuming we were to protect the fence and not the tree. Would that be correct? Is that what I'm understanding? It's okay to damage the tree provided that we get this fence up?
I don't think we should present this as a binary choice. I think we require the wall to be built and then the best intentions to manage the tree in the construction, like every tree on those broader sites. Now, there's been 2 new houses built on that broader site, and each time the trees have been managed. They've been supervised by an arborist, and largely the trees are still there. So I don't think it's correct to present it as a black and white issue, fence or tree. I think we can have the fence and then manage the impact on the trees as best we can.
Another question,
Yeah,
Councillor Kai.
So what I mean is, say they pull down the colorbond fence and they start digging the footing for the brick fence, but during that time, if something did happen to the tree, then let's say it was unpreventable and it did happen to damage the tree, that is okay?
Well, it's not desirable, but to lose any tree, but if the trees can come and go in the people's gardens, people plant them, people take them out for a variety of reasons. There is nothing intrinsically special about the tree. It's not heritage listed, it's not scenic in itself. And so whilst it's a valuable contribution to the garden, it isn't the source of importance.
Right, okay, so priority-wise, the fence first.
Thanks,
and tree second.
Councillor Kai.
Yeah.
Do you have another question?
Oh, no, that clears it up.
No,
I just
thank
thought the
you.
tree was,
Question, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just looking to clarify some of the information. So it was the surveyors that deemed and the developers that deemed the wall was unsafe. It was then demolished under those reasons. Then they asked to build and they said, you've got to build the fence back. The fence wasn't heritage listed though. It was on the list perhaps to be, but we can't deal with perhaps as surely. But now we're asking them to put the fence back that's no longer there, that wasn't listed, and potentially a tree that was listed is now potentially going to get killed because of us putting a fence back that wasn't protected in the first place. I think a lot of confusion. Don't worry about the footings and so forth. That's not here perhaps. But that's where I'm struggling with the details, that a surveyor said it's unsafe. Was there any, I don't know if I can ask, but was there any prosecution around that? Or the result of that, there's no prosecution, so they really, in respect to the law, they did nothing wrong. To the community, that might look different to that. But there was no legality to knocking down that fence because it was deemed as unsafe. We're now asking them to put back a fence to protect a tree. That might, that's what, can I just, clarification, can someone just do that better than what I was just able to do? Because this is, very confusing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So, General Manager of Planning, Richard, specifically regarding the detriment to other persons and how that's defined with regard to the history of this item.
Well, the report takes the view that the wall is a significant element of the property, significant to the streetscape. It was certainly significant to the council at the time when they issued the permit, and it was significant to a large number of the community that wrote in. So when you take those things together, allowing it to be demolished and not replaced as a brick wall is going to be conceivably important to the council, admittedly a different council, and the community that wrote in who valued that wall. So we took the view that if we allow it to be removed, given that it's been important previously to the community and to the council, that would be detrimental to them. That's the view that we've formed, because the community have expressed their desire through their representations, and the council thought it was very important last time it considered it. So that's why we consider that not allowing or not requiring it to be rebuilt will be detrimental.
Does that help? Yeah. Any other questions at this point? Councillor Walker to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. I wish to speak to the amended motion.
Well, there's no amended motion. There's an alternate motion that we're all debating at the moment.
The alternate motion I wish to speak to. Sorry, thank you, Mayor. And in doing so, I will flag that if this alternate motion is not successful, I should be moving for us to delay a decision on this pending a engineering assessment of whether the wall can be rebuilt or not. It seems strange that we have an arborist report about the tree, but not an engineer's report about the wall. I don't quite understand that, especially when there are footings there already. Put aside all the things that have gone on before, because here now we have a decision to make. It may be a little frustrating for some people, the massive machinations that this has gone through and what has brought us to this point. But nonetheless, what it has been, as has been outlined by our officers, is a community concern for our heritage that we did intend to list and, you know, were dutifully gazumped in the process, and that wall was removed. It was by and large the wall on St George's Square that was leaning. This particular wall that we're asking to be reinstated was actually, by accounts, and I used to work in the area, it was reasonably unhindered by, you know, age or leaning or anything like that. But what we have before us is this alteration to allow that to continue, but based on what knowledge? Based on what do we have to base that decision? At the moment, an arborist who is saying that the tree may be damaged, of course any tree can be damaged, but damaged by what we know not. We do not know how deep the footings have to be. We do not know whether the footings have to be replaced. We do not know anything about modern techniques when it comes to wall building, when it comes to certain techniques that are used to reinstate solid foundations, injections of various chemicals and products that modern builders use in order to restore walls quite often. It was done indeed down the road on St John's Church. When the building was leaning away, the extension in 1996 done by Guns was leaning away from the original church by a matter of inches. It was restored and put back to where it was without digging up anything. So I'm not sure about any of that because I'm not an engineer. None of us are engineers, I don't think, and certainly our planners are not engineers. We are told by our CEO that that's not what we're here to discuss, and yet we're being asked to make a decision about whether this is or is not a detriment to other persons, whether it does or does not diminish heritage values.
Councillor Walker, can I just ask you to reduce the tone of your voice a little? You're getting quite worked up.
I do tend to get worked up about these things, Mayor.
Thank you.
I'm sorry if I've caused any offence in doing so, but when there's so many complex issues to summate, it does sometimes tend to create a little urgency in order to get through so many things. So if that has caused any offence, then I apologise. Mayor, but certainly not directed at you or at anyone else around this table. I respect the work of our planners in this matter, and I certainly respect the deliberations around this table. What I am saying is I won't be supporting this alternate motion. I do generally support that the wall should be reinstated, and I would like to not make that decision until I have a definitive answer as to whether that can be done or not with the safety of the tree in mind. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Are there any other speakers to 10.2? Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, we are in a difficult spot because we have an expert arborist. We have their report, and of course we consider that to be an expert opinion. We have expert planners and we have our own planners. And as Councillor Walker has pointed out, none of us are any of those things. So we do have to make a decision based on the best evidence that we can surmise from reading everything that's been put before us. I do support this motion today based on the fact that we're not going to get a perfect outcome. Looking at the side view, the Scott Street view of the wall in its current state, I believe that the chestnut actually softens that view, and I think without it, if there's a risk that that tree might not survive this, I think without it, it would be a far poorer result than removing that small section of colour bond in the return and rebuilding that with brick. The most important part I consider, from what I learned and listening to representations and reading the numerous reports, was that front face of that wall onto St George's Square being returned was the most important thing, and that has been conducted. None of this has been easy. It's been one of the most unwieldy, constrained developments that I've seen pass the table. And if we could end our action with it today here, I think that would be for the best for everybody at this table, for the community, and for the proponent, planners, developers. That's my small contribution to this. I've made others in the past, but I will be supporting this today.
Thanks, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the others who've spoken. This has been as I said, a long-running thing. The wall and the retention, the rebuilding of the wall was a condition of the original development application to which the applicant agreed. The wall was both on St George's Square and also the return on Scott Street. It is the return that gives the wall its structure and its strength. You have a buttress wall to stop the wall being pushed over. Without it, all you have to hold it up are in fact the piers that are built into the wall along St George's Square. When you turn a right angle and then have a thing, you have to push that whole right angle over. Whereas when you have the wall, you only have the individual piers that are holding up between the bricks. So structurally, it is very important to actually return the Scott Street buttress, our brick wall, to the original wall if you want it to last another 150 years. My recollection of that wall goes back a long time, and for as long as I could remember, the wall on St George's Square had a lean into the house. The wall on Scott Street did not. When the wall on St George's Square was removed, and it was a two-part removal, then there seemed to be a problem with the Scott Street wall, because guess what? You had taken away the right angle, the strength of the wall. As someone who's laid bricks, you never see them build all one wall first and then go around the corner and do the next. They always build them together so that you have the strength of the right angle. And if we want this wall to replicate the boundaries of the property that was important to at least 60 people who wrote in about the changes when originally proposed for this architect designed house of the 1960s, to be knocked over, retention of that wall was critical to it, and it is still critical to residents who live in the street today. And I ask you to go, if we do not pass this today, and we do in fact lay the motion on the table, to go and stand and look at the wall from outside the takeaway shop. And you just see a single wall that way. You do not see the strength of having the return on the corner. That is what marks the corner of the block, not a colour bond wall. So to me, this has been a very interesting process to go through. I'm quite happy to move the original motion should this motion fail. I will not be voting for this motion as it is at the moment. I'll be voting against it because I believe a contract is a contract, and the original condition of the wall To rebuild the wall both in Scott Street and St George's Square was what the developer agreed to. You must remember, bonsai trims tree roots as well as branches. It doesn't kill the trees. It simply stunts their growth. And also, horse chestnut trees send out roots in every direction. There would be no roots immediately where the existing wall and foundation are because it does not penetrate concrete or bricks. The roots, if they hit it, would have gone down underneath it. Therefore, removing, if necessary, the existing brick footing plus any concrete footing that's underneath it from the 1870s and doing that by hand, and if necessary, digging a little deeper and perhaps trimming some little roots will not kill that chestnut tree. That chestnut tree has already had its roots cut as reported in the thing when they were building a wall further away. That's an indication of how far the roots go. So please do not be conned by what is being asked of you. We had a contract, we want the contract to be delivered upon. And that contract is for the rest, not only for us, it's for all of Launceston to mark that boundary of what that original estate was. Not simply one wall on it and the rest being a colorbond wall, but a solid brick fence. Thank you.
Councillor Harris, thank you. I'll ask you to reconsider the word conned.
So I can reconsider.
Deputy Mayor, question.
Quick question. When we talk about what the implications of the contract were, was it to rebuild the wall in brick as it was because it was built not that way?
Manager of Planning, the question is around what the rebuild was to include.
The rebuilding was to include the corner as brick. That's what we're seeking relief from. The amendment is seeking relief from the requirement to rebuild it in brick.
Are there any other questions at this point? Are there any other speakers to this this alternate motion? Yes, Councillor Kai.
I am really confused. So I was wondering, I don't know what to vote for this to give us a bit of extra time. So, like, do we vote against or?
So can I just outline the procedure?
Yeah, thank you.
So Councillor Palmer has moved an alternate motion, which is essentially saying leave the fence now the way that it is with the colour bond. That's different from what our trained officers have asked of us today. They've put forward a motion that says that it should be retained and it should be rebuilt in brick. So Councillor Palmer's motion, seconded by Councillor Britton, if it's passed, will essentially leave the fence the way it is. If it's lost, then we will be seeking someone to move the officer's recommendation or something different. Okay? So Councillor Britton has a question. Councillor Britton, you are the seconder. You have spoken, but you can ask a question. Okay, so if there's no further contributions, Councillor Palmer, you're going to close.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you to my fellow councillors for all their conversations and interesting views. I have just got to stick with the facts that are in front of myself and the rest of my colleagues. At the time that the wall was taken down, the wall was not heritage listed. That's what I take from this conversation. Absolutely is now, that's what I've been led to believe. But at the time, it wasn't heritage listed. If it was at the time, well, that's a different story. It wasn't at the time, it was structurally unsound. If it was me living at that property and I had a young family, absolutely that wall had to be dealt with in some way, shape or form, and that would be to knock it down so it didn't hurt anyone. The second thing I've got here is that in front of us all is the letter from the Australian Tree Care Frank I don't know how to say his surname, Rossol. And I draw your attention just to the bottom few paragraphs. Such excavations so close to the chestnut are not conducive to the health and stability of the tree. The proposed works are going to intrude upon and impact the SRZ for the specimen, with the real potential of causing health decline and the catastrophic failure of the tree. As such, the proposed construction of the fence and the protection of the tree appear to be in direct conflict. The best outcome for the chestnut in this situation is to leave the tree with no disturbance or excavation at all and leave the present more than adequate colour-bound fence in place. So everyone's had an opportunity to speak, voice their opinion. I've put forward an alternate motion, which I hope I do get the support for, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Is there any councillor who is unsure on what we're voting on? There being no one unsure, we're going to put the vote. The amendment is minor in nature and would not unreasonably diminish the heritage values of the existing brick fence and would not cause detriment to other persons. All those in favour, raise their hand for the alternate motion. Councillor Palmer, Councillor McMahon, Councillor Britton, Councillor Kai, Councillor Pentridge, Councillor Dawkins, Deputy Mayor. Those against, raise their hand. Mayor Gibson, Councillor Walker, Councillor Dr. Raze, Councillor Harris. 4, it's lost. 7-4, it's carried. 7-4. Thank you. Officers, did we get those names? Great, thank you. We now move to 10.3, Churchill Crescent, visitor accommodation, change of use of 3 dwellings to short-term accommodation. We welcome Speaker Jill. Please make your way to the microphone.
Thank you. Jill McPherson. I live with my husband at 11 Churchill Crescent. There are 4 11 Churchill Crescents, which I'll get to shortly. My husband and I objected to the proposal to change the use of 3 dwellings close by us to short-term rental because Churchill Crescent is not fit for purpose. It's a funny little street and has lots and lots of safety issues. It's narrow, dangerous to both drivers and pedestrians. It has intersecting, difficult, steep access drives, a slip road, limited parking and a single footpath. However, this has been deemed a traffic issue and I won't waste your time sort of going over old ground, so I'm happy to deal with traffic. My 2 minutes is a plea to councillors to be proactive and rule out unsuitable areas before they become subject to developments. Because once they do, I think it's in the hands of the state planning. I sympathise with councillors who feel their hands are tied in making sensible decisions. Hobart's done this with a whole Wapping area, I gather. You can't have short-term accommodation there because of parking, essentially. Across Australia, people are waking up to the residential neighbourhood tension of these short-term accommodations. And Launceston seems to be a bit behind the times. And I think, with all due respect to planning, there seems to be a sort of Pollyanna view that everything will be all right when you've got, 3 houses together with short-term accommodation. I believe the City of Launceston is investigating the conditions for a fair rental market. Perhaps short-term profits have had their day, and we can look at social cohesion as a far better sort of aim There is a place for short-term accommodation, of course, particularly where the ambience of the setting complements the holiday experience, but it's not usually within the city.
Thank you, Jill. That is your time.
Oh, okay. I just want to know if the 3 are put or accepted, that's 20% of Churchill Crescent. There are 15 houses that access the street. 20% is a huge number, or huge percentage. Do we know what the percentage is in High Street, in David Street, in surrounding streets?
Thank you. I have no additional speakers listed. Someone to move item 10.3. Thank you. Someone to move. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. A seconder? Thank you, Councillor Britton. Deputy Mayor, do you wish to speak? Councillor Britton. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll speak to this issue, and I can fully sympathise with the residents of the area. And it's interesting, you know, looking at it as in that percentage-wise, that 15 houses, 3 of which would be turned to, you know, a overnight sort of stay accommodation type model. I suppose, and I can't speak for other councillors, but you know, for myself, there's a feeling as though the deed has been done in a way. These have been built; they do exist. I'm not a particular fan of the way it's been done, the excessive ground covering that's been required in order to achieve access. But the one good thing about that is that I suppose it means that whether they're rentals or Airbnbs, that cars can be parked off the street, and indeed spaces for 2 cars for each property. So, you know, bearing that in mind, there's obviously the owner feels there's a demand for this type of accommodation, just as we know there's definitely a demand for rental accommodation in Launceston as well. I think we'd all be pleased if we knew that, as it was originally intended, that they were going to be rental units, that would have occurred. It's, you know, potentially unfortunate that they are not, but it is all well within the realms of possibility as far as the planning scheme goes, that this is what is allowed. It's been interesting to read the checkered history of Churchill Crescent in one of the representations going back to the 1990s in terms of access, in terms of the street being blocked off and the difficulties surrounding the street. And I'm certain that council and knowing someone that lives on the other side of the gated street, it could well be something that council should look at. The temporary nature of a boom gate in the middle of the street, which the lock is actually broken, and sometimes it's swung wide open and other times it's padlocked shut. That's an aside, I know, but it does contribute to the concern residents have. Other issues such as the egress onto David Street, I think it is, understandable, but arguably it is the case that if they were rentals or if they were overnight stay, the traffic levels wouldn't be a lot different. Conceivably, if they were rentals, you would have 1 or 2 cars at each property. They would be coming and going daily, just as it would be if they were overnight stay accommodation. So it is a difficult one. Certainly landowners and developers are within their rights to do what is within the planning scheme, and that is, it appears in this case, what they have done. And while I appreciate the objections, I think that it's difficult to refuse this application, as confusing as it would have been for neighbours. First of all, to have the development and to make representations against that, but then to see that be changed in a reasonably short time frame into a different scenario which is now going to be short stay accommodation. It is difficult access and all those types of things, but none of that is to be a planning scheme consideration. Yes, if it generated a large amount of traffic, that would be true. If it created a dangerous scenario, that would be true. But it's at the end of what is normally a dead-end street, depending on whether the padlock is on the boom gate or not. Somewhat regrettably, I will be voting to support this, bearing in mind the concerns that the representatives have made, and also I suppose their disappointment in the nature of how their street, the nature of how that street is changing from a purely residential one to one that does incorporate different uses. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. There's no right of reply, I'm sorry. Councillor Harris has a question.
I do, just in regard to two things. One is the distance from the back of the unit's deck to the back fence. I am assuming that meets the minimum standards that were to be put in, because when looking on the internet site where the rental property shown, it seems like the deck almost extends to the fence, but maybe that's just the image that's been taken. And the second thing is, in regard to the address of the units and the signposting, are there any conditions that have been added to the applicant or this application to, if you like, help with the wayfinding? Because some of the residents had been concerned that they'd be woken by people trying to find where 11C2 might be, and I could understand that would be a difficult address if you got off a late flight and had arrived in Launceston to go to your short-term accommodation.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Manager of Planning.
The first question on the endorsed plans shows 4 metres from the edge of the deck to the rear boundary, and following discussion on the bus trip, an additional condition was crafted, and that's condition 4, which says prior to commencement of the use, a sign must be provided to the satisfaction of the manager city development to direct visitors to the property. Such signs must be located in the vicinity of the frontage of the subject land and maintained for the duration of the use.
Great, thank you. Councillor Harris, any further questions? No. Councillor Dawkins, you wish to speak? Yes,
please. Yes, I noted the inclusion of the directional sign in condition 4 and thought that there are ways that could succeed and fail depending on the materials used, and I suppose from the proponent's perspective how much they intend for that to really work, because it will need to be lit up at night if it's going to work. And also, I guess, with that short-term accommodation, it's really important that the sort of directions that are given to somebody who's coming somewhere for the first time, especially if it's into community and not into the middle of a city where there's a lot of similar activity, that directions need to be accurate. Otherwise, they'll find that they get negative reviews and people won't be going there. That won't be one of their preferred places to stay. Now, look, I think any of us living on the hills of the valley understand some of the issues with steep driveways, single foot paths. A lot of the streets that are heavily used in our communities have very, very similar attributes, and it is incumbent on us all to use them carefully and to ensure that pedestrians are always considered. I remember passing my driver's licence, perhaps not the first time I tried, but maybe the second, and pedestrians are always at the, you could not pass if you did not say, if considering how you approach this particular scenario, pedestrians are always first. And I think that's something that we have lost a little in our communities, and something that we will be discussing further when it comes to the speed limit reductions. I will be supporting this today, albeit reluctantly, because I can see that it is a big change for a small community that's already undergoing considerable change. What gives me comfort is the well-established trees on that property. I think they do add a layer of softness to what could become a very hard edge development. As long as the conditions are adhered to, I believe this could work, and I guess it will be up to whichever platform hosts this and the proponent to ensure that they meet the conditions and that the people staying there are safe, as are the community.
Question from Councillor Harris.
Yes, if I may. I believe we probably approve anywhere between 50 and 80 short-term accommodation applications. Why is this one before us? Because we haven't seen the other 79.
Manager of Planning, Richard.
Just simply because it got representations.
Thank you. Are there any additional contributions from the table? Deputy Mayor, do you wish to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. Those against? One against in Councillor Harris, carried 10-1. Thank you. Council no longer sits as a planning authority. Item 11, announcements by the Mayor. 11.1 there for your reference. I wonder if we could delete, please, yesterday, Anthea, the QVMag Friends meeting at the QVMag Art Gallery. Did not attend that meeting. I want to draw just your attention to one item, and that is an item on the 10th of March. I had the pleasure of attending the 2023 Tasmanian Honour Roll of Women induction ceremony at the Country Club, and you've heard me, councillors, in a workshop, but more publicly I would like to recognise the outstanding advocacy and achievements of our colleague Councillor Andrea Dawkins, who was inducted at that ceremony, and deservedly so. We're very proud of you and all the things that you continue to achieve for our community. Congratulations. Are there any questions with regard to the Mayor's announcements? Councillors' reports. Any reports from colleagues? Councillor Dawkins.
I was delighted to step in for you at the Harmony Day launch, Harmony Week launch on Sunday. I noticed that Councillors McMahon and Councillor Dr. Razzo were there as well. It was lovely to see you both. Beautiful food and a wonderful environment. But I'd just like to remind everyone that the theme of this year's Harmony Week is Everyone Belongs, and the idea that culture, sharing culture, food, music and stories brings a greater understanding of culture, and that leads to acceptance, which is what we must now do. We live in a time which is beset by a myriad of issues. Launceston needs to keep progressing the way that it is to become a more multicultural community, and it's incumbent on us all to be a part of that positive story.
Yeah. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to speak to the incredibly enjoyable evening that I was able to attend with quite a few fellow councillors at the 2023 Spirit Super Business Excellence Awards, commending the work of Will Kate and the Launceston Chamber of Commerce team for a night in which recognised the significant contribution through business and innovation to our community. It was my privilege to represent the Mayor in presenting the Outstanding Event Award to Encore Theatre Company's production of Jersey Boys, recognising at the same time also the amazing amount of work and reward that we can see in the current production at the Princess Theatre of Priscilla. So I also wish to congratulate all of those who won, were nominated and recognised on the night, as well as all those who continue to contribute and excel in our business community.
Here. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to add to what Matthew's just said and make note and congratulate Joe Archer on being inducted to the Hall of Fame.
Indeed. Any other councillors' reports? Councillor Kai.
I attended the Nomads of the Sea on the 11th of March with, I think I was the only councillor there. And yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know it's not really child friendly, okay? So if you're going to attend, I think it's on display till, I think it was June. Was it June the 25th, I think it was? Yeah, don't take your kids with you. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kai. Any other councillor reports? Questions by councillors. 13.1, councillors' questions on notice. A response to Councillor Dr. Raze's question pertaining to infrastructure at Relbia. Councillors' questions without notice at 13.2. Councillor Kai.
I received a message yesterday. I'll just read out the question. We were asked, are we, as a council, actively helping to prevent vandalism, youth, thieves and people getting onto awnings and rooftops in the CBD?
Thanks, Councillor Kai. We might take that one on notice in terms of the things that we're doing from a preventative measure in regard to that.
Thank you.
Any additional questions without notice? Councillor Pentridge.
They're actually climbing on top of the crane in Timothy Street. So I think it's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt. So maybe we should do something to prevent that.
So thank you, Councillor Pentridge, for that example. I think you've raised a good point with regard to reminder of individual responsibility, but for us to look at as a council in terms of awnings and infrastructure and the like, what we can do in that space. So that's captured. Another question, Councillor Kai.
It's regarding the same issue. So I actually said maybe to talk to the property owners or call the police when this happens, but they said that these kids that are going on roofs and awnings are actually using council properties or something to get up there. So I didn't quite ask in detail what council properties it was, but I did ask if they could give us the address and things like that.
Great, we'll look into that. And if you've got specifics, that would be really useful to send through to the CEO for us to be able to look at any specific pockets of the community. Thanks, Councillor Kai and Councillor Pentridge. Item 14, notices of motion. Notice of motion from Councillor Walker. Moved, Councillor Walker. Is there a seconder? Councillor Kai, thank you so much. Councillor Walker, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for your feedback and otherwise support regarding this notice of motion, which is there for everyone to see in the agenda, but for those listening, this notice of motion involves everyone who lives in Launceston. This is an opportunity for our community to get behind, to support, but also to suggest and think about and imagine the possibilities that the Patterson Barracks in the lower end of St John Street could provide for our community as a civic centre, as a place of history, as a place of entrepreneurial spirit. It is a site that has been long held, perhaps always held by our Defence Forces, a historic barracks that is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, public building in Launceston, and a significant site that under the city deal that Launceston Council signed in 2017 is something that was agreed would be vacated by the Defence Department and made available for the benefit of Launceston City. How that benefit eventuates is partly up to us today, and hopefully if this motion gets support, then it is up to the community of Launceston, the greater community of Launceston, to envisage how this could possibly become a great civic centre for Launceston, one that attracts locals on a daily level but also engages with tourists and allows opportunity for our entrepreneurial spirit, whether it be markets, a Salamanca-style market, whether it be community groups that are meeting together, whether it be some of our various performing arts people, whether it be bands like the City of Launceston Band or others who require spaces in which to develop their own practices and contributions to our community. This motion seeks a pathway forward that Launceston Council, the City of Launceston, could approach the Defence Force with the endorsement of our community to envisage such a use. It's the beginning of a process that would require our council, and especially our CEO, to engage in a pre-feasibility study of what could be achieved there. And that in turn does involve assessing the different uses that might go with that from the community. And then to make a final decision within 12 months as to whether to develop a business case that would be taken to the Defence Force. The Defence Force are in no way or shape determining what would happen when they vacate the premise at the moment. It could be that it goes to the open market, but they do have provision to hand it to a suitable level of government as a off-market deal, whether it's state or local government, depending on what that proposal might be and the community benefits that would come with such a proposal. So in moving this motion and the steps that we would be taking, I would like to acknowledge the significance potentially for Launceston, a growing city, a city that does require civic space for these things to happen. The significance of this opportunity can't be understated. The amount of public buildings that are no longer in public hands are quite significant around Launceston, whether it be TAFE buildings, Charles Street Primary School, old hospital sites, Customs House building, and many others. They're in the CBD area, apart from what the council directly own in the chambers and the public building that the state government use. There is very little in that category. And finally, I would like to acknowledge the groups, and it is in this motion today, that have initiated this interest: the Launceston Historical Society, the Tasmanian Family History Society, the Friends of the Launceston Mechanics Institute, who have a huge amount of, especially literature, books, from a building.
Councillor Walker, do you require an extension?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mayor.
Moved Councillor Palmer, seconded Deputy Mayor. All those in favour raise their hand. That is carried by all councillors. Thank you.
As I was saying, the Friends of the Launceston Mechanics Institute, who have the library from a building that was adjacent to the building that we stand in today, in what was Cameron Street, is now Civic Square, the Mechanics Institute, who are keenly looking for a home for that library, and also the Australian Artillery Association and various military historians who would like to also think that there may be opportunity for them to find a home in such a significant part of Launceston's public history, our colonial history, our military history, and our European cultural history. So I do commend this motion to the table, and I look forward to the responses from my fellow councillors. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Seconder, Councillor Kai.
Thank you, Mayor. At the meeting of the Heritage Advisory Committee on the 15th of March, the possible sale of the Patterson Barracks site was raised. Following discussion relating to potential positive uses of the heritage buildings and the need for ongoing stewardship of the historic site, it was suggested that the council should seek to acquire the barracks to allow for community-based uses. The community members recommended that council acquired the Patterson Barracks for the public good, and the motion was passed unanimously. Patterson Barracks will ensure we have extra meeting space that we are lacking at the moment. This will not only benefit the community, but also our own council committees too, as we are currently struggling to find space for our committee meetings. and the timetable for our currently available meeting rooms is extremely full. By acquiring one of Launceston's most important heritage sites, we will be connecting local communities that will have a positive outcome for Launceston and will be appreciated by all groups inside and outside the council. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kai. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Walker for bringing this motion today, having the foresight to start the debate around this really important historic site. And I echo the words of Councillor Kai. That's exactly why we're here to have this conversation today. This is strategically an important site. We've been talking for a number of years now about our livable city and how we join the estuary with the CBD. Obviously, there's a lot of activity at the moment which is doing that, the university, where it's chosen to build. But this is a strategically incredibly important site for that. And how rare is it that an opportunity like this comes along? And the kind of activities that could take place there, I mean, my mind, and I'm sure all of yours are, is brimming with ideas. That's perhaps not for today, a little further down the track. But there is an opportunity now to lobby our federal MP to ensure that when those expressions of interest are open for this site, that community activity is right at the top of that weighted list of how the Defence Department will choose who the next owners, operators, custodians of this really important piece of real estate are. Because if we lose it, we're not getting it back. And we know that. We've seen it happen with so many historic buildings. We don't want to lose this suite of buildings. We want to ensure that our community has a say in what happens in this site next.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you. I also wish to arise to thank Councillor Walker for bringing this motion. He's to be commended for having the foresight to think about it. The three-storey heritage building on the corner is obviously a heritage listed building. I'm not so sure about some of the others who are on the site. And so I do ask all of us to perhaps don't be constrained by what is there, but in fact we may be able to in fact reconfigure what is left. We clearly have to leave the heritage building, but the rest of it may well be able to be reimagined. Because what is really critical is that in any rehousing of meetings or things or places to this particular site, we need to make sure that it is activated every day of the week, of 7 days if possible. You don't want it just to be used once a month or once a week. That would be a shame. And we certainly don't need, as a council, another Macquarie House that's sat empty just down here so close to us for more than 20 years doing nothing but storing boxes. And that is the only risk of this proposal, is that we do have to get the community to open their minds to what it could be and make sure that they come and talk to us when we ask for that community consultation. That's what we need to have, those flood of ideas, so that we can look at it and go, yes, this will help do, as Councillor Dawkins said, connect us through green space, particularly because a lot of it is sealed at the moment, but that doesn't mean it has to be sealed forever. It could be turned back into lawns or otherwise and make it a lovely green space in that part of the city. So I look forward to seeing what the CEO's report in the next 12 months.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Any other contributions? Councillor Walker, do you wish to close?
I thank those councillors who spoke for their kind words and their suggestions, and it is true that it's probably not for this day to prescribe what it could be. A green space, of course, buildings that probably will be removed, but who's to say? No doubt opportunities for retail or commercial ventures. It would be nice to think that if council were to be involved in this, apart from the benefit from the community, that we also are able to reduce the impost on the community, if not create something that's reasonably cost neutral. I suppose I note with interest a survey recently done, Launceston, Hobart Council, and their dealings with Salamanca Market, a hugely successful, operation that Tasmania's world famous for. But nonetheless, Hobart Council looking at increasing the fees involved with that, and the community response being that, by and large, people support a cost-neutral outcome with Salamanca Market. That it's there for the council to provide that opportunity for stall holders not to make a profit, not to make a loss, but to provide that opportunity. And that's what we have in front of us here. I am excited and, indeed encouraged by just the ideas I hear around this table, let alone the ideas I've heard from other people in the community I've spoken to about what could be possible on this site. So that is what I look forward to as well in the pre-feasibility study and the opportunity for these ideas to come to fruition over the next 12 months. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. And that is all councillors present. The motion is carried 11-0. It's 3:10. We're going to have a 10-minute break and recommence at 3:20. Thank you. All right, thank you, councillors. At 3:20, we're back on air. I'll reopen the meeting, noting that all councillors, with the exception of Councillor Britton, are back at the table, noting Councillor Mackenzie is on leave. Item 15.1, Tender Review Committee meeting held on the 9th of March. Someone to move. Thank you, Councillor Walker. A seconder. Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Walker, do you wish to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mayor. The item is explained there in the agenda for today. Council notes that subject to a change in the state government grant deed on account of more money being spent in one area and less in another in regards to upgrades to football grounds in Launceston, indeed Birch Avenue, and although it's not mentioned here, in Churchill Park, that council accept the contract tender that is in front of us as a progress to the changes that will be made at Birch Avenue in the improvement of the change room building for various fixtures.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor Harris.
Nothing further to add to that.
Thank you. Any councillor wish to add to the conversation? Councillor Walker, anything further? Put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. All councillors present. Carried 10-0. On to item 16, the Community and Place Network. 16.1, Thylacine Statue Relocation. I've got Mr. Robin Smith listed as a speaker. I'm not sure if Robin is still with us. He's not. He's gone back to run his small business. We note his interest in the item previously through the questions that he asked. Someone to move? We welcome Councillor Britton back to the table at 3:22. Someone to move item 16.1. Councillor Harris, thank you. The seconder, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Harris.
Thank you. This has been a long-running issue of the thylacines that were installed in the Brisbane Street Mall when it was reconfigured and opened in 2018. It has been quite a journey, I guess, of what to do with these wonderful animals that we had created but weren't perhaps in the right place, being located at ground level when people were tending not to look at the ground when they were walking, but in fact looking at something else, whether it be in shop windows, the person they were walking with, or more likely their phone. And so we had a number of incidents. So to me, putting them up was a logical place to put them so they wouldn't be tripped over. They couldn't be up too high because then they become a hazard should small children climb on them and they fall off. So the relocation of them to the Civic Square precinct seemed to address all of those issues, as well as giving us perhaps an opportunity to put some more green space into the Brisbane Street Mall, because it was something that in the original plans, I believe, there was lots of greenery, but over a process of community consultation, a lot of it was removed because people wanted to be able to see clearly from one side to the mall to the other. And I think we probably ended up with a lesser outcome than what was originally planned when that redevelopment in 2018 was originally first set up. So very happy that this result puts them in a good location where I think they are relevant. They're still able to be seen. They're still able to be played upon if you have small children. But I think they will now be in a safe place. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. In the interest of fairness, noting that Mr. Smith has returned, Mr. Smith, would you like to speak to the item? We've got a mover and a seconder, but we're happy, given your interest in that.
Yes, I would. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be speaking against this motion. And I'd be speaking to the councillors and asking them not to vote for it for several reasons. This is City Heart Stage 1 outcome, and this was the only art installed in the mall under that project. If this goes, we've only got the It's About Us round statue. Unfortunately, to advise the councils to make a decision, the report is very often supremely informative, but it doesn't look at those mitigation options that there could have been, that I've even been to council to mention about raising them up for safety. It doesn't make any case to keep them, and there's no consultation with the public, traders or business bodies in the report. The footings are not insubstantial as we're required if you do put them in Civic Square, and of course there are problems inherent with the proposal under this motion. The height someone could fall is greatly beyond the permitted height for safety, as I see in the officers' images proposal. The downside for the mall is that they'll replace them with the urban canopies. We've seen those in Charles Street. The water, power, fabrication time, growing time, it's not very successful, and 50% of the plants down there are currently dead in Charles Street. And the options from here for us are, for me, to consult with traders and the public, because we weren't aware of this proposal, and to encourage council to continue with the corrective measures that could be taken for the sculptures, which would be to put them somewhere in a safer location within the mall, and that the other items that were never installed, the skeleton of the thylacine be installed, and the footprints for customers. So I'd ask councillors to consider voting against this. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Smith. Seconder, Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor. The thylacine relocation, the Tasmanian tigers, I absolutely love them. I do agree that they definitely need to be moved purely for safety and up off the ground. I did have one question. In some of the graphics that we've all been sent, were there two of them on the grass area towards the far end of Civic Square there? I would have concerns because my thinking is we're moving them because they're on the ground and they're a tripping hazard. So if they're placed on the grass area there, there's still a tripping hazard. I know the majority of them are raised up, but there's two on the grass area. Is that correct? They're going to be on the grass area?
We'll answer the question at the end.
Okay. So, yeah, but I do think they need to be moved for safety, basically. But, yeah, I think they're fantastic, and if we can keep talking about it to find the best possible location, I'm all for it. Thank you.
A question with regard to the two artist impressions of the tigers placed on the grassed area, which was the fountain.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Palmer. So noting that they are impressions at this stage, we obviously still need to work with the artist to make sure we get the positioning right of those thylacines when they do, if they do relocate into Civic Square. That area was identified as a good location where we could slot one or two thylacines potentially, based on the open space around it. It's more an area where you would lay, sit next to, you could still take photos, engage with, not necessarily as a thoroughfare for traffic, which is a little bit different to the current location.
Thanks, General Manager Dan. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to Dan and your team. We've obviously been through this as a workshop, an extensive workshop with a lot of imagery and a lot of work has gone into this to put maybe some community concerns, great questions to ask, that we're looking at places where if someone is to climb and fall, they won't hurt themselves. They'll be in a garden bed, they'll be set back far enough that they're on the grass. We have explored the options, and it's been expressed by fellow councillors of different animals that can also be induced from our native Australian sets. There's other things that we will be looking at for installations in the mall, that it's not going to be a reflection of the Charles Street. That's not the same as what we're talking about with urban canopies. Those gardens we were able to go and talk on, that they are going to be filtration systems for our waters. These are all things that I think that we can all work to create the story and create the narrative back into the community, that when you hear urban greening, it's not the big towers that are actually starting to really flourish. Those little planter boxes have just been redone along Charles Street. I walk past it every day, so commended to be moving forward with those sorts of things. There is going to be more activity from this council in the mall. Moving these and relocating them into the square, I think, is a fantastic idea. Creating a bit of excitement, some hype, activities for the kids to go and find them, some information alongside them, like what we talked about in Workshop Round, letting people know what things are there, what they're doing. And I think it's a great initiative, good bit of fun, smart idea to get them off the ground without any tripping hazards and really a good community-minded thing.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Dr. Raze, and then a question from Councillor Harris.
Just to make what's the reason we are moving them? Safety is the most important issue here. And we're not just talking about young people climbing them, actually. It's about elderly people. And Launceston in particular, we have got the highest proportion of elderly in our population at 22%. And as you get older, the vision deteriorates. And most importantly, I think you don't recognize how they have visuospatial impairment, that they don't recognize the space between your body and the object in front of them. That's why most often elderly people do trip. And I think these are important issues that Council have considered and support the motion to move.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Raze. Question, Councillor Harris.
Yes, just in the comment made by Robin Smith about the fact that this is in fact the only art installation in the mall, and so it perhaps does raise the question of can we perhaps have some idea or whether we would have a future new art installation in the mall to replace these thylacines, because perhaps they're not the most suitable for what that is and one for the space.
What an excellent question. General Manager Dan.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Yes, it's a valid point and a genuine good issue to raise. As you know, we've recently moved approved the public art strategy, which a key initiative of is to identify suitable locations across the city where we can start incorporating public art. Clearly, one of the major thoroughfares and retail hubs being the Brisbane Street Mall would be part of that process to identify what we could be placing into that space and how we could best achieve that.
Any other contributions? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll just start by thanking Mr. Smith for his contribution, and I appreciate his location as a trader in the mall and his concern that we're taking away one of the few things that we have added to the mall. And, you know, of course, we did do the refurbishment of the mall, but let's not forget that, you know, there was compromise in that process. There was a conservative nature to that process. To some extent, it became a piecemeal and tentative gesture rather than a bold, exciting gesture. And that's what we're left with, more so by the removal of the thylacines. If we had a replacement, as Councillor Harris refers to, if we already had developed something, you know, my mind goes to the Charging Bull of Wall Street or something like that, you know, a slightly impressive sculpture that you can't help but, you know, take notice of. And there's many, many sculptures like that around the world, including in our cities in Australia. We don't have that. My concern also goes to the celebration of the thylacine, and it's quite curious that we're now suggesting that we might be, in this removal, if it's successful today, we might be suggesting that a find the thylacine type theme for the location in the Civic Square, something that people have tried to do for the last 60 or so years unsuccessfully. Nonetheless, it is the logo for our Launceston City Council. There's some synchronicity there, something for perhaps this council or a future council to consider as well, that we identify ourselves with the thylacine, for better or for worse. I do digress, thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to. I've spoken of that history of the mall, and I appreciate people's comments. Oh, yes, we could have raised them off the ground and things like that. I think it calls for a far bolder vision for our mall, one that doesn't compromise, one that does make a bold statement that brings people into the city, not just once, but continuously. How we do that, who we speak to, whether we do that in-house, whether we look outside of council, I'm not sure. I know we have the plans for the greening. I don't think anyone would disagree that bringing, you know, fauna to our streets is a great thing. How we do that, you know, is up for some discussion. I know that we have those plans. But having said all that, that's largely not what we're here to discuss today, even though it's mentioned in the preamble here. We are just here to decide whether to remove these and relocate these thylacines, which, you know, I will reluctantly support today, knowing that we don't have anything to replace them in the mall. That's my big concern. I know that we can all talk about future plans and ideas, and that might be a great thing, but we don't have them. Apart from the greening of the mall, and in itself is probably not what any of us think is the end destination for what we want, which is the very heart of our city. So let's be bold. Let's reassess it as a council. We've listened to the community insofar as that this has been a tripping hazard. You can't ignore that. You can't say, well, you just get used to it, walk around it, whatever. We've chosen to embark on this path to relocate them rather than put them on plinths and they become sort of static objects that you walk past and look at. They'll still be interactive on the ground in alternate places. So they still fulfil, and I note that the artist involved has also given his consent to that. But yes, let's be bold. This is not the end of this story. We spent a significant amount of money on the refurbishment of the mall. It's like having a blank slate, really, with the removal of the thylacines. So now is that opportunity to be bold and to do something that Launceston can justifiably be proud of and can talk about and share with the wider community. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Deputy Mayor, I wonder if you would have the chair for a moment. I want to stand to support this recommendation. I want to thank Marcus and Michelle, who in just a couple of quick months have got this matter to a point that we can consider it and we can draw it to a close, because since 2018 it's been hanging around, and what they've done is used a fabulous criteria that has got to a great new relocation plan that takes into consideration all of the options that we have considered for rehousing them in the mall, creating additional structures, rising them up, putting them on plinths, putting them on grassed areas and the like. But they've also added additional criteria, and criteria that I think our community expect of us, and that is to be responsible with the funds. There was significant expenditure with regard to what started out, as Mr Smith said, as children's play equipment, which thankfully turned into public art. What I'm hearing and sensing from our community is that there is a willingness and a desire to have public art in the mall, and I think we as councillors should be bold, should take the public art strategy and use that as an opportunity to create something that speaks to the boldness of our city moving forward. But I also think that this option, which in just a couple of quick months sees us rehome the thylacines to a much more appropriate location, is one that we should support, and we should thank our staff for getting us to this point, whilst also being very mindful of the fact that we've spent a lot of money on the mall. This is additional funds being spent on retrofitting, perhaps something that could have gone better at the time. We've learnt from that. People have moved on and the like, and now we need to draw a close to items that are hanging over for years and years, and I think this is one we all should get behind and support and move forward with. Thank you, Deputy, as you hand the chair back to myself. Are there any other additional speakers? Councillor Harris, do you wish to close?
No, thank you to all the councillors for their comments. I must admit, when Councillor Walker mentioned the bull on Wall Street, my mind went to Adelaide and their spheres, or what are commonly known as the mall's balls. But perhaps whether we have our own version of that or not, I don't know. But we do need to have something, because I think it does lack it. And it doesn't have to necessarily be, I think the creativeness of the art is not just painting walls and all that sort of thing. I think that's important, but I would think that some sort of sculpture is probably appropriate for us as a city. What that is, who knows? Perhaps we should be open for suggestions. But for this point of view, let's get the thylacines moved to the right location and then move forward from there.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 17, the Infrastructure and Assets Network, 17.1, Launceston Speed Limit Review. That Council endorses proceeding to community consultation on the Launceston Speed Limit Review recommendations, and at a future meeting we consider the outcomes of community consultation to determine support or otherwise for the Speed Limit Review recommendations. Someone to move. Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Harris.
Yes, this is the start of a process of community consultation for us to consider the speed limits both in the CBD, but also the Kingsmeadows, Mowbray and Newstead shopping areas, as well as the speed limits along 4 of our major arterial roads, being Bathurst Street, Wellington Street, Invermay Road and High Street. It is something that everyone will have an opinion on. Many people have contacted me saying we need to keep the speed limits as high as possible so that we can get as many people through an intersection at a set time. The reverse side of that, of course, is the risk of having someone die if you hit at 50 kilometres an hour is 85%. If you're hit by a car at 50 kilometres an hour, you have an 85% chance of dying. If you reduce that speed to 40 kilometres an hour, the risk drops to just 25%. So when you think about our highly populated CBD and major regional shopping areas of Kingsmeadows, Mowbray and the CBD, 40 kilometres an hour does seem to be a logical speed limit to me. Most people would say, and in fact many people have said to me, that in fact it's difficult to do more than 40 kilometres an hour because you're always stuck in traffic. And so in fact, aren't we already introducing a speed limit? But it is in fact for those times when there isn't as much traffic around, but there would still be people around. And if we are to encourage more people into our city and have a long talked about nighttime economy, then we do need to have consideration of the speed limit of those city blocks. So I'm very happy to start this process. Some other people have suggested to me that we need to look at the arterial routes and the number of traffic lights along them. And in fact, a couple of people said to me the success that we have had with the removal of the traffic lights where the Esplanade intersected with Charles Street and how that allowed us to move. That isn't what we're here to do today. It is in fact just the speed limits, but it is interesting to think about that in conjunction with the whole process. And I'm not sure whether that would be open for such comments. And the comment made to me was that perhaps the Canning Street intersection with Bathurst Street could in fact be removed to allow the traffic lights to flow better through there rather than being stopped after it's just such a short block. Something for us, I'm sure we'll get lots of thoughts, just not about the speed, but lots of other suggestions of how to fix our traffic. And so I look forward to what the good residents of Launceston bring back to us.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Seconder, Councillor Dawkins.
Well, being one of those good residents of Launceston, I've got a few ideas and I'm going to share them with you now. So there's no doubt that cars have become bigger since I started driving, and also they have become more numerous. Looking around Launceston College is a fantastic example of how quickly that's changed. So when I was at LC, there were about 4 students that had cars. There was not really an expectation that you'd have a car at 17. We had to earn money for our first cars. It took me a long time. But as the years have progressed, our community's become wealthier, no doubt about it. Now it is rare, I think, for a student at LC not to have a car by the time they leave year 12. And we've shown that by how difficult it is to park in that area and how difficult it is for LC students to be able to manage that. So our city's changed. We've changed the way we use vehicles. What we haven't changed is the way that our cities are laid out in order for the community to still have that safety that we've talked about here, safety and connectedness and livability, whilst increasing participation in the motoring networks. So I think it's really important. Like today, I feel like we're getting somewhere with a few items that have been hanging around for a long time at this council, and this is one of them. To get to this stage again, because we've consulted the community before, but these very specific areas that we're going to reduce the speed limits is incredibly important. If we're going to get to a place where we start to ensure our community know that people on the ground, people on mobility devices, people on cycles are every bit as important as people in cars. And I think right now, looking around the city centre, you can't tell that. It feels like we're always talking about how well, put it another way, it feels like a lot of the criticism that we get is about vehicles and about use of vehicles and where people are going to park their vehicles and for how long and for how much it's going to cost. When I think we've missed the point that a community is not an economy of cars. A community is the way that people move through it, how they use it, how much time they spend in it, how free they are to spend that time in it. And this is one step along that path. Now, I know I have digressed. and I do appreciate that. But I think it's incredibly important that we consult the community, but please, can we not over-consult this time? Can we do the consultation? Can we understand the data, and can we move forward? And at the same time, allaying the fears of those who don't want to see this change and perhaps any other changes.
Thank you, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Dr. Raze.
Thank you very much. Well, reduction of speed limit in CBD, it's not just happening in Launceston. It has been happening all Australia, even abroad. It's not about just reducing traffic injuries, improve the environment, economy, and livability. Councillor Harris has been showing us the lower the speed limit, the higher chances of your survival. Now, reducing speed in Launceston is even more relevant because we've got the highest proportion of elderly people. And also in Tasmania, we've got the highest proportion of worst road tolls per 100,000 population. So all that's actually relevant in improving that. Most importantly, I feel it will increase respect to pedestrians. I'll give you an example. I was walking along the river with my dog. I was crossing the bridge at the traffic light. All I will hear from one driver, hurry up, otherwise you will be hit. And this is just an example how we need to change that culture. I think there is an important factor we should consider, that it will make people more physically active and encourage more people to cycle to the CBD, to shopping centre. And I think that's relevant when we've got the highest rate of chronic health problems. Most importantly, it will be part of what the Launceston City Council strategic vision, which is creating healthy, happy, and active community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Raze. Question, Councillor Walker.
If I may, thank you, Mayor, to the relevant officer. It's true that the scooters, indeed the hire scooters and personal scooters, can't be ridden on a road above 50 kilometres per hour, I do believe, is the rule. So would the reduction of that speed limit in, for example, Mowbray from 50 to 40 would consequently mean scooters would be allowed to ride down the street of Mowbray, or would it be, am I misconstruing that situation?
General Manager Shane.
I'm not sure your initial statement was correct. I don't know, but all vehicles have to comply with the speed limit. So there's not an over. So it's posted at 40. They have to go at 40. Whether you,
I will reiterate my question. I'm quite sure the state legislation states that scooters cannot be ridden on a road that is rated above 50 kilometres per hour. Yeah. So that means by reducing the Mowbray, Invermay Road at Mowbray to 40 kilometres an hour, someone would now be allowed to ride down the middle of the road in Mowbray Shopping Centre. Is that correct to your best knowledge?
that is not correct. My understanding. It's to do with line markings on the road as well, where there's a centre line.
Thank you.
The centre line.
Councillor Pentridge.
In light of what Councillor Dawkins just said, and one of my little embarrassing things, not that that very often happens to me, I sent a bit of a thing out the other night. Local Government Act, I think in agreement with what Andrew was saying, or my understanding of it, I think it's time that this council, instead of consultating, I think it's time we made a decision in the interest of this community. And I think there's been enough said here this morning, or this afternoon, where reducing the speed limit within the city would be a good thing for the city. So why don't we start something new and make a decision? I'm pretty sure that if the community doesn't like it, we're all going to hear about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pentridge. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I do rise to support that we move this motion and that we do put it out to community consultation, because of course we've already seen a community response, if you pay attention to the social media and things like that, and the variety of opinions around this, that it will make no difference, that it will be an improvement, that it will cause traffic delay and traffic jams and all that sort of thing. None of those things are necessarily true, but nonetheless, it's understandable why people would think that. Realistically, if you drive through the CBD now, I think you'll probably find that 40 kilometres an hour is probably a generous estimation of how fast you'll go. Similarly with Wellington Street or Bathurst Street, going through Mowbray, as we know, or Kings Meadows and Newstead, you'll find that it's, quite a challenging business at many times of the day. I mean, there is the side of this where if you're going to work at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're used to going at 60 kilometres an hour along Invermay Road and now you have to go at 50 and there's not another car in sight, you might think, oh, well, this is a little bit problematic. But, essentially, that, of course, is a rarity to begin with. There's not that many people doing that. And realistically, when you actually sit to work out that 10 kilometre an hour difference for what a 2 or 3 kilometre stretch of road, you'll find it's extremely, it's in the matter of seconds that you'll have lost. So, look, there will always be objections, based on this sort of idea, an exception to the rule type of idea. What we're doing is trying to make a more livable city, a friendly, sharing, caring city. We do share the road with other users, whether it be pedestrians, alternative forms of transport, cyclists, motorbikes and others. And it behoves, upon all of us that we pay attention to that and that our attention is raised, in a sense, through this sort of process. It'd be nice to think that we could do the same thing for our furry animals that, in Tasmania, up to 1 million or so are affected by excessive speed. And indeed, the roads within our municipality. This is where at night time it does matter to our marsupials. They do come out at night. They are, regularly affected by what you might not call excessive speed because we have a speed limit of 100 kilometres an hour on our roads. But nonetheless, slowing down by 20 kilometres an hour makes a huge difference to that outcome. Just like in this instance, although it is, not often that someone is seriously injured or killed on our roads, it is still the case that there's plenty of accidents, minor or otherwise, that do disrupt the traffic flow. There are accidents that do injure people, and on very, rare and sad occasions, there are accidents that kill people. So that's the basis of this. It will go to public consultation, as it should. It becomes an educational process. What we're saying in this is that we do have people whose job it is to look at these things, whose job it is to make these assessments. They're not done out of some kind of random desire to interfere in people's lives. They're done because there's a genuine benefit to be had and there's very little to lose in doing so. And hopefully, I think the majority of people will see that over the coming months. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Are there any other contributions? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think just going forward on what's been spoken of here as to how fondly this has been taken on board, that the facts and figures are there, the community consultation will happen, but I think that if it's the general feel here that we put that consultation in a creative and in a positive way, we celebrate the small wins that will happen with the only a couple of seconds that you lose, and we really do put a quick turnaround time on, because this will be heavily publicised. The media's already running at about what Dr. Raze was saying. The world is making this change. We're a part of the world. We're at the forefront of this. This is something we can do. So let's get on with it. Let's hear what they have to say, put a positive spin, and we'll implement this if it's felt appropriate, which I believe that it probably will be.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Harris, do you wish to close?
I need to say thank you for the support of all those around the table, and that let's get on with it, and let's make this relatively quick and curative in community engagement, so we can be back here shortly to talk about what the actual changes will be implemented, as Councillor Pentridge has said. Let's do something about this. Thank you.
Indeed, and before we take the vote, I draw your attention to page 189 that says the State Government's Transport Commissioner will have the overarching determination once we reach consideration at the end of the consultation phase. Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. It's carried 11-0. Thank you so much. Let's move to item 18, Organisational Services Network. 18.1, lease, City Park Cottage. Someone to move 18.1. It's moved. Councillor Pentridge. Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Harris. Councillor Pentridge, do you wish to speak to the item?
Look, I think that City Park Radio occupies that space, and I think they're a fantastic organisation and a great part of our community, and I think we should look at renewing it and doing it at the best possible. It doesn't necessarily, they're a community-run organisation. If we can do something to assist them, I think it'd be something that the community would appreciate.
Thanks, Councillor Pentridge. Seconder, Councillor Harris.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Pentridge, and just to say that I've often spoke on City Park Radio with my Rotary hat on, and I'm always amazed at the number of listeners that comment back to me that they had heard me on the radio. So it is an important part of the fabric of our city, and very supportive of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Anyone else wish to speak to 18.1? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor, and it's been a great success story, City Park Radio, for Launceston and the partnership that it's had with Launceston City Council using that building. I was involved many years ago, especially with Mr David Seiss, who was quite instrumental in a lot of the advances that they made there, and very persistent in his advocacy for the station, the building of the new studios at the back. It's a wonderful little facility, a great template for Launceston City Council as to how it can support its community, and indeed, how many people do actually either benefit by listening or are involved in volunteering there.
Councillor Pentridge, do you wish to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That's carried 11-0. 18.2, budget amendments. Moved Councillor Palmer, seconder. Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Palmer, do you wish to speak to the item?
Thank you very much, Mayor, and I think this is a wonderful recommendation put forward by our Manager of Finance, Nathan Williams. And if I could draw your attention to pages 76, 77 and 78, you'll notice that we do have quite a few decreases in the budget there, and we do have some increases. And one in particular there is the Lilydale Community Play Equipment, and a commitment has been made to the Lilydale community to install play equipment. Although there is a playground available at the school, there are no other playgrounds available in Lilydale during school hours or for children below school age. A central site has been identified adjacent to the newly renovated Lilydale Pool. This project, and this is something wonderful, this project will be delivered by City of Launceston's Internal Park Services staff and will provide an important development opportunity for the council's apprentices, which I think is fantastic. The playground is estimated to cost $65,000, so that's wonderful. And another amendment there is the inclusion of the Christmas decorations, which I think we're all really positive about for our city and surrounding regions. And so I put this forward, and I'm just really happy that the community of Lilydale will have a new play equipment to go forward. It's really important down there. They actually don't have any play equipment for young families. There is some play equipment at the school there, the district school, but there's nothing available for the young families, and there's so many new families moving into that area, raising their families. So I think this is a wonderful inclusion, and I hope we can just put this forward and move it.
Thanks, Councillor Palmer. Indeed, we are moving it. You have done so. The seconder is Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to what's happening at Lilydale, there's a couple of other Lilydale projects there. The Lilydale Bowls Club, where some shuffling of money to provide another $30,000 for their synthetic green, along with a further $165,000 together to be added to the $305 given by the state government for the refurbishment at the Lilydale Football Club and the provision of new toilets, amongst others. So it is probably one of those things we get regularly from our finance people that shuffles the money around because for various reasons some projects can't proceed. So the funds that was allocated to them is allocated to those projects that are proceeding that need perhaps additional funding or otherwise. So this is just a typical procedural type motion, shall we say, for what we're doing here. And it does show the scope and the range of things that council is in fact involved with, including providing the additional flagpoles on top of Town Hall, which was a necessity to put $51,000 in the budget to make that a reality, to fly all 4 flags on the Town Hall, including the Aboriginal flag. So happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other contribution? Councillor Pentridge.
Must be getting late in the day, but I think the council should be congratulated. The residents have brought this up, and Andrew does need a pat on the back. And they have felt that they've been left out of it. We amalgamated with the council for quite some time ago, and they've had several, let's call it complaints, that they weren't being included. And I hope that with this playground, I can recall one of the ladies saying that when her daughter started school, they wanted the playground, and I think we should celebrate that she's finishing school this year and we've finally got there. So I think that's fantastic, and I hope that we find some of that money that we're talking about that gets left over, where we make a great day of it when it's handed over, and make the community part of it, and just let them know that we haven't forgotten about it. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you, Councillor Pentridge. Councillor Palmer, do you wish to close?
Thank you, Mayor. And I would just like to say thank you very much to our General Manager and yourself, Mayor, for all the support you gave me in relation to this. And yeah, thank you very much.
Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. Budget amendments is carried 11-0. 18.3, progress against our annual plan actions as at the 31st of December 2022. Thank you, Councillor Harris. Moved. Seconder. Deputy Mayor, thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thanks. This is simply a review of our progress, 6-month review to our progress against our annual plan. I won't go through it all in detail, but it shows that many of the areas are in fact well advanced, and some have yet to be kicked off. But nevertheless, it is a good representation and an honest representation of how the council has performed for the past 6 months or so, up to the end of December. And clearly there are some areas that we need to do more in, but I think it's a great thing to just bring this information into the public forum for those who want to take the opportunity to read it. I won't go through it now, it's getting too late in the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. It was the wrong arm, it was the arm of Councillor Dawkins. So apologies, Councillor Dawkins is the seconder. Do you wish to speak to the item, Councillor Dawkins? Deputy Mayor, would you like to speak to the item? Would anyone like to speak to the item? Councillor Harris, anything further? Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. The motion is carried. We now move to the CEO Network review of the impacts of short stay accommodation on the rental market in the city of Launceston. Someone to move the item. It's moved Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Pentridge. Councillor Harris.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to the CEO's office for the report that has been produced. This was something, a motion I moved back in August last year to understand the effect of the short-term rental market was having on the long-term rental market in Launceston. There were many stories in the media at the time of people who couldn't get access to housing, and in fact it's not unique to Launceston or in fact Australia. It is in fact a worldwide problem as we see the rise of homelessness. Interestingly, to see that when you look at the number of rental houses in Launceston, which I think was around about a third of the housing stock is actually in rented. It doesn't take much to move the vacancy rate from 2% vacancy, which means if you're looking for a house, it's relatively easy to find an affordable house if you have a job and that sort of thing. However, if you take a few hundred properties out of that 10,000 rental properties that are available and move them to the short term, then the vacancy rate drops to under 1%. And once you get under 1%, that's when it gets tough. That's when rents start to rise. That's when you have queues of 30 and 40 turning up for every open house of a rental. And unfortunately, that is basically where we seem to have found ourselves here. On the other side, we have found that the number of properties that have moved to the short-term rental market is not perhaps as big as what people might think. However, a number of those that were long-term rentals have been identified as moving to short-term, which is, of course, detriment to the long-term rental market. And in fact, today we even had that very example in front of us with the ones at Churchill Crescent, yes, was the address. So this is understanding the problem, but what to do about it. That is the challenge that we have in front of us. There are some suggestions there for the CEO. I think there were 5 recommendations of what were to be considered and to give us information back on that. So this is just the report back to us at this stage without anything firm. Probably the only thing I would add to this report is that one thing that had been identified that does seem slightly at odds with my sense of fairness, and that is that if you operate a registered B&B where you provide a bed and breakfast, you pay a different business rate for that property. However, if you have a short-term rental property on Airbnb, for example, you pay a residential rate, and that does not seem quite fair, and perhaps that is something that could be added as a 6th item, I'm not sure. I'm sure the CEO will do a review of those and come back to us in due course with suggestions of where we go from here. We've seen other councils make attempts to try to address this issue and then found that they perhaps can't do what they thought they could do, and we certainly don't want to fall into that category. So it's very important that we do make haste slowly and actually review and understand what we can do and the effects of it, but we still need to consider whether we can increase the availability of housing stock. Clearly the simplest answer to that is build more houses. We simply can't get away from that. But whether we end up with a vacant property tax or other things that could be considered, not for me to say today, but we need to make sure that whatever we do is fair and is enforceable legally.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Just for clarity, I'm just going to read out the recommendation. So one is that we request the CEO to investigate the introduction of a differential rate for short stay accommodation providers in Launceston and provide options for council to consider. 2, that we lobby the state government to require more transparent data to be provided on short stay accommodations and the interaction on the long-term rental market. Specifically, it must be easier to track the number of long-term rentals that transition to short stay. 3, that we prioritise our actions to create additional residential land within the City of Launceston. 4, we continue to monitor the city's rental market with a specific focus on the number of short stay accommodations that are available. And 5, that we request Legat to investigate and report on the implementation of a vacant residential land tax for unoccupied homes within the state. That's moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Pentridge. Councillor Pentridge, do you wish to speak to the item?
I think most of the things that I thought I've got covered. The only thing that if our city manager, our CEO. I'd like to see a bit of consultation with the owners of some of the B&Bs. I mean, there is different standards, and we're talking about people who had an oversized garage in the backyard, who converted it to try and get a bit to supplement some of their income. I mean, that's one style. There is some people that have built some pretty impressive, or have got not built, renovated some pretty impressive houses, and I know there's a certain burden there by keeping them to the standard that's required. So let's give these people an opportunity to talk to the CEO and give their views before we make a final decision. Remembering there's a lot of empty houses that are just empty, which just seems like a huge waste.
Indeed, thank you. Councillor Dr. Raze.
Thank you very much. The Launceston City Council has been great to recognise an increasing issue which have impact on the community. This short stay accommodation has been increasing since 2019, so it's like a modern phenomenon. We have also recognized that the increasing number of short stay has been at the expense of long stay rental accommodation. We have to look at what's happening around the world. Just for example, in study by University of South California, where they found 10% increase in their Airbnb had been accompanied by 0.4% increase in rent and 0.8% increase in house prices. So we have noticed that even in Launceston, just the last 2-3 years, we have massive increase in house prices, nearly 20%, which is at all decent. And at the same time, in the report, it said there has been increase in rental as well, about 12%. What is shocking, like now with the expensive rental, that some workers, they pay 59% of their salary. I mean, that's shocking. That raises the point sometimes, do we need to have even capping? If you look at some European countries like Switzerland or Austria, where they have cap, you can't allow to charge people up to 59% of their salary. And that's quite an increasing problem in the future. The other issue will be, we have to be fair. How come like hotels and motels, they have just got regulation and pay well here, at advantage, and they can offer them even cheaper rate for that. Launceston is different than other cities because we are still a community city. And therefore we have got this deep connection between our neighborhood, isn't it? In other cities they found, let's give you an example in New York, how they have got more short stay here accommodation now than long term. That's for them. And then it's somebody recognized it's turning into ghost town. Only few people turning up. And then the rest of the time it's empty. We don't want Launceston to turn up like that. And this is what I feel Launceston City Council has recognized that. And we have to look at it and review the situation. And we have to help our rental. Give you an example how people are evicted from their long-term rental accommodation. Why? Because they can get more rent on the short-term accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raze. Councillor Walker has a question.
Thank you. And it refers to recommendation to lobbying the state government. Perhaps the CEO, through you, Mayor, could just explain what specifically data does the state government have in terms of long-term rentals and the transitioning to short-stay accommodation? If you could explain. Yep.
CEO, through you, Tony, come to the mic just over here. Our data analyst, welcome. Just press the button. Next one.
Yeah, hi. The data you're referring to is CBOS, and there's two types of data. There's one which is basically accumulated from the providers themselves, and that has things like the address. It has other bits and pieces like development application, permit identifiers, and so on. And the trouble with that data is that it's sometimes duplicated. And so what they do is spend quite a lot of time summarizing and deduplicating and making a lot of checks. So the data that is shown in the report, which adds up to 516, is less than the data which is what we've called in the report the detailed data. And if I'm off by memory, I think that's 636. And the issue is that the detailed data has addresses, which means obviously we can map things, we can tell you where things are happening. It also means we can track where areas are becoming perhaps a little bit more dense. But the summary information that you've seen in the report is just two numbers. And so what we're asking is that the people that are responsible for that can try and tidy up that information a bit more so that we can get the detailed information, which is the one with the addresses and so on, but at the same level of quality as the summary information. And I got in contact directly with CBOS to ask if that was possible, and they at the time said, not really. So that's where we come to this conclusion, this recommendation rather, sorry, that we say we'd like this data to be somewhat more accessible, in particular the address information, the development application permits and other sorts of things like that. So we end up with, I think it's about 10 columns of information, whereas the summary information that you're working with is basically two numbers.
Councillor Walker.
So one more question, if I may. If I just go back to that, then would it be the case, do you think, that this lobbying should be immediate? This should be one of the first steps that we are taking in order to achieve what we wish?
CEO has advised it will be.
In which case, could I move an amendment, thank you, that we push the word immediately lobbies the state government? I'll just move that amendment to the motion, if I may.
It's moved, Councillor Walker, that we add the word immediately ahead of lobbies. Someone to second the addition of that one word. It's seconded. Councillor Pentridge. Councillor Walker, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
I'm happy to let it stand. Thank you,
Councillor Pentridge.
One small thing that...
We're just speaking about the one word.
No, I'm more than happy to go with that. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak to the amendment adding the word immediately ahead of lobbies on point 2 of the recommendation? Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. It's all councillors present. The motion is carried. The word immediately is added to the substantive motion. Any councillors wish to continue speaking? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the preparation to council officers for this notice of motion. We have plenty of examples around the country of, as has been pointed out, of councils who've tried to address this issue, especially through their financial levers and pulleys. Now, my concern is in considering the introduction of a differential rate, what our motivation for that is. Partially where, if it was to be additional funds that are coming to council, where those funds would be employed and directed to, and partially whether in actual fact that increase, or whether that increase is meant to have an impact on how many properties are on the short stay accommodation market. I don't think we are necessarily clear about that, and I don't think that other councils are necessarily clear about that. My preference, of course, everyone's preference, is that short stay accommodation doesn't impact the rental market, but of course, just having one Airbnb that was a rental property impacts the rental market. If we are to pursue a differential rate, I would like to see that money goes directly towards alleviating the issues that we are concerned about, either the availability of housing or indeed homelessness itself. That's where that money has to go. There's no point charging that extra because, you know, one thing is certain, and I was listening to landowners on ABC radio this morning talking about land tax and the increase in land tax in Tasmania, increase in cost of land tax because the value of their properties has risen. Now, they simply pass that on to the renter. They don't actually, you know, wear that impost. Maybe some do to some degree. That's a judgment for the landowner. But if you have an Airbnb, and it was experienced in Brisbane when the council raised the impost on Airbnb holders by 50%, that the ones that I heard speak about it said, we will simply pass that on to the people who rent out property. Now that might change the market minimally. It might not change the market at all. So my concern in that recommendation 1 is that we understand the reasons why we're investigating the introduction of a differential rate for short stay accommodation. I'm all for supporting it, as I say, if we are united in the reason that we are doing that and where that additional income will go. So in that sense, I will support it. At this stage, we're just investigating. We're looking at different models, and I'm sure there'll be no shortage of those out there. But let's also, when this comes back to the table, link it directly to a benefit that will go to either people looking for rental accommodation or people indeed who feel they are actually cut out of the rental market and indeed find themselves homeless.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Any other speakers? Councillor Pentridge, have you spoken as the... No, I beg your pardon. Councillor Pentridge is the seconder.
Look, there is one of the good things. We are here to represent our community and the interests of our community. There is, and I think having a little bit more conversation about all this, maybe in a workshop, would be beneficial. Not everyone who buys or has a short-term accommodation do it for any other reason other than the current house is too big for them and they want to look somewhere else. An opportunity comes up where they buy another property and then they try and put it to some use with the interest of long-term moving into that house. So what they've done, what they do is, I mean, we have lived in good times. Money, you know, to some people who have had permanent jobs is available. If they see a place that they're, especially coming closer into the city or closer to the hospital or whatever, they buy that place, then look for something to do. It'd be unfair to disadvantage those people when they didn't buy those residents for monetary gain. All they've done is bought it, because in actual fact, we're fixing a lot of our problems because their houses will definitely come on the market. Not very many people at an older age want to maintain 2 houses. So I think that should be considered and talked about. Thank you.
Thanks, Seconder, Councillor Pentridge. Question from Dr. Razay.
If we're going to get more information and data, would we be able to access how much of this rental accommodation, whether short or long-term stay accommodation, are owned by property investors? Because that's actually quite important. We know that in Australia, 2.2 million property investors, they own 3.2 million properties. But there is differential there that 10% of these investors own 3 to 5 houses and 1% own more than 6 houses. So if we are going to apply differential rate, would you be taking that into account?
We can. Yeah. That can be incorporated into the investigation should this be passed. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Harris, do you wish to close?
Only to say thank you to everyone for their contribution, and we look forward to seeing the report from the CEO on what our next steps in this space will be. Thank you. And
great.
Look forward to everyone's support.
Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is carried 11-0. Thank you. Item 19.2, the NTDC with regard to the members' letter of expectation, the revised constitution and the members' agreement. Someone to move. I'm on page 241 of the agenda. Moved Councillor Dawkins. Seconded Councillor Harris. Councillor Dawkins.
It's laid out in the document that we have visited this many times over the last at least two terms of council, and this is the next iteration to ensure that NTDC is working for this council as it has to work for the others that it represents. We're looking for more transparency, more front-facing information so we can understand how money is being spent and to ensure that we do have a stake as one of the key stakeholders. Yeah, that's essentially it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Harris is the seconder.
Just briefly to say that having an organisation like NTDC is actually very important for how Northern Tasmania as a whole negotiates with particularly the federal government to lobby for money for us as a region. They don't really want to be lobbying with individual councils. I guess because there's 30, we've got 29 in Tasmania. They would rather deal with just 3 large organisations who represent a region. So from that point of view, having a working NTDC type of organisation is actually very important for every council. It is probably somewhat less important for Launceston on a high level because we have a city deal, but for all of Northern Tasmania's benefit, having a strong NTDC lobbying for all of the 8 councils in the Northern Tasmania is actually a really important thing to have. So I support this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Any other contributions? Councillor Dawkins, do you wish to close? We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is carried 11-0. Thank you. We now move to page 328 of the agenda. 19.3 National General Assembly motion, off-road bicycle and pedestrian pathway funding. Moved, Councillor Harris. A seconder. Councillor Britton. Thank you. Councillor Harris, do you wish to speak to?
I will. This is a motion that I have worked on for a little time when I saw that the Australian Local Government National Assembly was meeting in Canberra in a few months' time, looking for motions to put to the federal government. As background, it's often said, and in fact I think it's a credit to Albert Einstein, that if you keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome, then that's really the definition of madness or insanity. I think if we are to have a city that embraces active transport, for all the reasons that I'm sure Dr. Rase will stand up and tell us all about, for the health benefits, the reduction in traffic on roads, we have to have the infrastructure built for it. And at the moment, bike lanes, and particularly off-road bike lanes, are simply either ad hoc, and they certainly need to be funded, and they need to be a network. Having a single off-road bike is nice if you're at one end or the other, or along the way, but it's not much use if it's not networked. So my idea here was to take to the federal government a motion from all of local government to say, don't just fund roads to recovery for more cars, because guess what? If you widen roads, you simply encourage more people to come and drive on them. But if you build bike networks, or off-road bike networks, then you will get people to actually get out of their car and drive and ride or walk safely. Because statistics tell us that 1 or 2% of people like me, they're quite happy to ride out on the road. Another 6% are feel safe with a painted line beside them on a road with cars going past at 50 or 60 kilometres an hour at their elbow, within 1 metre, of course. But for 60% of the people, they do not feel safe. And so if we are to make any quantum shift of the mode of transport for people in Northern Tasmania, or in fact around Australia, the government has to give us some funding to do that. And that is really what's behind it for myself. So I'm looking for your support today to take this motion to the National Capital to then address the National Assembly of all local governments, to then pass that on to the federal government for us to then have a dedicated fund. There was no dollar figure put in it. You could have put $1 billion a year or whatever. They certainly spend many $1 billion a year in roads to recovery. But the return of putting money into off-road bike and walking infrastructure is many times greater than just adding to it. And if you look at our, the issues facing the planet with global warming, with the internal combustion engines, the number of vehicles, we still have more than 90% of people every day driving in a car by themselves to go to work. We need to do more to encourage people to look at alternatives, and that means building the infrastructure, and they will come. So I'll look for your support on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Britton, do you wish to speak to the motion? Any councillor wish to speak? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Harris, for bringing this forward. I will be supporting it. I do have, concerns, but I like many of these things, you have to start somewhere. I suppose one concern is that there's not a dollar amount attached to it, that we don't have a clear understanding of what's being asked of the federal government. Of course, they already do provide funding for these types of things on an ad hoc basis, depending on which council you're from or which state government you're from. You might find you're the recipient of funding for bike paths and the like. It's really just alternative transport these days, rather than, I know it refers to bike paths, but really we're talking about alternative forms of transport, including walking and running, of course, which is not that alternative at all, really, is it? Original forms of transport. I'm sure someone could ride a horse along there too, maybe. But nonetheless, I support the concept. There's plenty of concerns you could raise, but doing something is quite often better than doing nothing. And that's, I think, what is behind this in a way. Get this on the agenda of the federal government. They'll have their own interpretation of how that's done, whether it's through regional partnerships or, what models that they have. But the idea of a pool of funding being there means that those councils that are motivated to see this in their area will be able to step forward with some confidence that they might be able to achieve this. Other councils who don't might then look at those councils and say, well, we want that too, which is quite often the way, especially in Tasmania. But no doubt, Australia-wide, we do look to other councils, and when they do something well, we wish to replicate it. And so it will provide that opportunity. It's not that opportunity is not necessarily there. We got funding, many years ago, probably over a decade ago now, to put the white lines on our road. That was part of a federal funding initiative of $800,000 or so for Launceston Council back in the day. So, but to have it under this type of guise, I suppose, my only concern would be it is a general reference to bikes here, bikes there, whereas I think it's really alternative transport. But either way, I shall support it.
Councillor Razay.
Thank you very much. Thank Councillor Harris for his effort in trying to push this forward. It's a major undertaking to encourage people to not just cycle, but also to walk. But we have to create safe tracks and pathway for them. How often do we see people, elderly people, I see them along the river opposite Silo, and they stop me and said, we'd love to go bike riding, in the city, but it's not safe. We go to the council, of course, but we don't have enough resources. It's not like putting bike tracks in major street. We need to have major network to cover the whole city, so people in the suburb can connect to their work. And now there's a criticism sometimes. Oh, the Launceston city is so hilly. Well, no excuses now. We have got motorized bikes. So even like if you can't go uphill, it's not that difficult to have that. This is, as I said, relevant in Launceston especially. It's about preventing diseases when we have got the highest chronic health problem. And it will have also impact on the chronic health problem in the future. And I support Councillor Harris' effort to push this forward and get funding.
Thanks, Councillor Dr. Razay. Councillor Pentridge.
I have to agree. I mean, there's a lot of challenges out there, but we won't go into that. So I'm sure that we're all innovative enough. But the opportunity to get on your bike to go a short distance is lots of ways preferable. I must admit I could sick to death of getting in the car, starting it, just to go a kilometre down the road, right? And we're all a bit self-conscious and we want to try and be as fit as we can. But I think that part of that funding should be to provide facilities. At the moment, down at the Glebe, I would have probably 50 bikes that have either been stolen or abandoned or whatever. You need to have somewhere to park your bike. And as George has said, there's some beautiful bikes out there now that you can actually comfortably jump on and go from point A to point B. But what do you do with it when you get there? I mean, you can go to the problem of locking it to the pole or doing this or doing that. But it'd be good, part of that program should be maybe to provide some facilities like a hardware stores, shops, destinations, and allow people to, take their bike and know that when they come back out again, it'll still be there. So.
Thank you, Councillor Pentridge. Anyone who's looking for their bike should contact you. Councillor Harris, do you wish to close?
Thank the other councillors for their words. And yes, as someone who is now riding an e-bike to council, I'll try to do it every meeting, particularly on a day like today where it's nice and sunny. It does work, and as you mentioned, the end of trip facilities are very important to encourage that. And the end of trip facilities does mean secure storage. There are a multitude of secure storage options available in Europe because they've obviously been doing this a lot longer than what we have, some of which convert existing car parking spots to somewhere to park your bike up to 16 bikes. So when you consider that you could take 16 cars off the road and park 16 bikes in one car parking space, that is indeed when you can start to make significant changes. However, we have a long way to go before we get to that, but we do need to start somewhere, and this, I hope, is the start of that journey. Thank you.
Let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is carried 11-0. Item 20, a motion to move into closed council for the items and reasons listed. It's moved Councillor Walker, seconded Councillor McMahon. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour raise their hand. That is all councillors present. At 4:37, we'll move into closed session. Council returns to open council at 4:48 p.m. Someone to move? Councillor Harris, and seconded Councillor Britton. All those in favour raise their hand. All councillors present. The motion is carried. The meeting is closed at 4:49. Thank you.